Chapter 754. The East Gate of Yangjing City's 7th Ring Road could be considered the most deserted exit in Yangjing City. The armored hover train and the other trucks entered from the West Gate, while most of the sword-bearers entered from the South Gate. This was because the East Gate directly faced a vast expanse of farmland, and these farmland had achieved a high degree of automation. There were less than 200 people from outside the city responsible for monitoring the situation of each farmland in every control room. Those who really needed to enter and leave Yangjing City from the East Gate were only these 200 or so people from outside the city. Many times, the number of people and vehicles entering and leaving the East Gate did not even exceed 10 times in a day. Therefore, although the entire East Gate had 10 entrances, the other 9 were all in a closed state, and only one entrance was open. On this day, the administrator of this entrance was bored to death as he used his personal terminal to read a novel downloaded from a forum. In this day and age, if the content of a web novel didn't have a bit of an erotic plot, then no one would be interested in reading such a novel. This administrator saw an interesting part. The male lead of the novel, the sword-bearer, saved a beautiful, ordinary human female lead, and sat in a hover car, preparing to escape from Yuan Ku's lair. The male lead suddenly, unfortunately, discovered that he had been poisoned. This novel would make all the blood in the male lead's body converge at one point, and then with a bang, the converged point would completely explode. Then, in order to save the male lead's life, the female lead could only give up her shyness, and in this small space of the hover car, used her own mouth to soothe the male lead's burgeoning body. Just as the administrator was reading in high spirits, he suddenly heard the sound of a horn. This administrator raised his head reluctantly, and saw a water droplet-shaped hover car parked at the exit, preparing to leave Yangjing City. There's actually a hover car leaving from the East Gate. The last time a hover car left from here was 5 or 6 days ago, the administrator thought with some doubt, but after thinking about it carefully, it didn't seem strange. After all, this was an exit of Yangjing City, and it was normal for a few hover cars to occasionally leave from here. In fact, the administrator was more interested in the appearance of this hover car. It was a perfect water droplet shape, and its entire body was natural, without a trace of artificial casting. Looking at the administrator, a desire to own such a hovercraft was ignited in his heart. Sigh, what kind of useless things are I thinking about? I'm afraid I can't even afford a single wheel of this hovercraft with 20 years of salary. The manager sighed. At that moment, the hovercraft raised its roof. The driver stretched out his hand and touched his personal terminal to the scanner at the exit. This person is actually the sword-bearer of Yuzhang City. The manager had worked here for more than 10 years, but he had never seen more than 10 people in Yuzhang City. So when he saw that Guhan belonged to Yuzhang City, he was very surprised. Comrade, you are going back to Yuzhang City. How is Yuzhang City doing? I heard that you were miserable during the Great Invasion. This administrator really didn't know how to conduct himself. How could he directly ask how miserable Yuzhang City was during the invasion? Gu Han responded with a "en," which could be considered as an answer. Comrade, where did you buy this hovercraft? What brand is it called? It's really beautiful. I'm going to look for pictures online to satisfy my craving. Guhan didn't know what brand this hovercraft was. At that moment, the inspection procedures were automatically completed, and the barricade at Yangjing City's main gate was raised. Seeing this, Guhan immediately commanded the hovercraft to move forward, and in the blink of an eye, it had left the administrator's line of sight. What's so great about it? Seeing that Guhan didn't answer his question and drove away, the administrator was naturally filled with anger. He immediately began to look at the nearby surveillance cameras, wanting to get a picture of Guhan, and then curse Guhan fiercely. However, when the surveillance video appeared in front of the administrator was surprised to find that there was something wrong with the video. Between Guhan's legs, there was a long-haired girl sitting under the seat. The girl's face couldn't be seen clearly, but her head was directly facing Guhan's crotch. Any man with a rich imagination could instantly figure out what had just happened. Wow! This is actual combat. The administrator immediately flipped through the book he had just read, and reread the plot in the novel. In an instant, It was as if the male and female protagonists were perfectly ensnared in the heads of Guhan and the girl with long, black hair. No wonder he didn't want to pay attention to me. He was busy doing something. The administrator instantly understood Ji Yuhan's thoughts with his own way of thinking, but he was still unhappy in his heart. He secretly took a dozen of the clearest and most imaginative pictures from the video and posted them on the forum. He named it "Lecherous Swordsman Had Sex in the Car in Front of the Surveillance Camera." As a result, Ji Yuhan instantly became a hot topic in the entire Yangjing city's forum, and it also laid the groundwork for what happened later. After leaving Yangjing City, there was no longer a city speed limit of 100 km per hour, so Guhan could finally try driving the hovercraft to its maximum speed. Because the hovercraft didn't have a dashboard to measure speed, Guhan could only use the map navigation function of his personal terminal to calculate his driving speed. In the end, Ji Yuhan was shocked to discover that this seemingly unparalleled maglev hovercraft wasn't moving very fast at full speed, only about 800 km per hour. Even the maglev hovercraft from 400 years ago was faster than this hovercraft. This discovery made Guhan's expression turn ugly. Guhan even wanted to turn around and return the car immediately. He thought he had picked up some treasure, but he didn't expect it to be such a good-looking but useless thing. But this couldn't be blamed on anyone else. It was Guhan's own conceit. He took it for granted that this high-class, prehistoric hovercraft should naturally have a speed that surpassed the current human standard. This matter also made Guhan take warning. It was just like what a famous person before the apocalypse had said. Don't think that the American democratic system will definitely elect the best. The American people may elect a president like Roosevelt, but it could also be Trump. Speaking of which, who was this Trump? The President of the United States who was proficient in Sichuan Mandarin? Guhan was very puzzled. Although the speed of the hovercraft was only average, Guhan immediately discovered the benefits of this droplet flying car. This hovercraft actually didn't need to slow down on the road. The maximum speed of the hovercraft could only be achieved on flat roads. In the real world outside the city, the hovercraft had no choice but to use most of its engine power to increase its height due to the terrible environment. This way, the hovercraft could only be driven as high as possible in the dense forest. At that time, most of the engine power of the hovercraft was used to increase its height, so the power used to increase its speed was naturally less. When driving on the highway ruins, the hovercraft could reach a speed of about 800 km per hour. But if it entered a complex forest environment, this speed could even be reduced to less than 100 km per hour. Moreover, the driver of the hovercraft had to be fully focused and alert to the surrounding environment. If they weren't careful, the hovercraft could crash into a tree, resulting in a tragic car accident. But this droplet flying car was different. To Guhan's surprise, no matter what kind of terrain it faced, this hovercraft could travel at the same speed. According to its operating principle, it didn't need to expend a large amount of power to increase its height. It seemed to be able to increase and decrease its height from the ground without expending any power. So, no matter how complex the terrain was, it didn't need to expend any extra power to reduce its speed. That was why after leaving Yangjing City, Guhan could actually maintain a speed of 800 km per hour. A simple calculation of the averages showed that overall, the droplet flying car was slightly faster. In fact, for Guhan, the fastest way to return to Yuzhong City was to follow the restored highway that the armored hovercraft had taken when he came. But the entire highway was under human surveillance, and his flying car would definitely be captured by the surveillance cameras on the road. If the people of Yangjing City found out that he had left Yangjing City to return to Yuzhong City temporarily, it would be bad. The 8th Academy Assembly was about to begin, so why did he run back to Yuzhong City? And when he ran back to Yuzhong City, the broken sword just happened to disappear. Even a fool would be able to guess that it had something to do with him. So, Guhan could only take the small road and return to Yuzhong City through the jungle. In this way, the advantage of the droplet flying car's speed and stability was even more perfect. The droplet flying car was good, but its biggest weakness was that it was too narrow. Even with Guhan's physique, he felt sore and weak after sitting for a while, not to mention Rina Takasaka between Guhan's legs. What gave Guhan a headache was that in Guhan's Zifu, Qingpin was constantly shouting and making noise, saying that she didn't want to stay in the scabbard anymore, and that she wanted to sit on Guhan's neck and stay in Guhan's pocket. Rina Takasaka was already enough to squeeze in here, and if Qingpin was added, who knew how noisy it would be? If only this space could be a little more spacious. Such a thought emerged in Guhan's mind, and in the next moment, something miraculous happened. The entire space in the droplet flying car suddenly began to expand in all directions. Be it in length, width, or height, all of them continued to grow. In the end, it expanded into a large rectangular space that was tens of meters long, tens of meters wide, and 2 meters tall. Could it be that this droplet flying car can expand and contract freely? Guhan immediately rushed to the windshield that was already more than 10 meters away from him, and was shocked to find that he was driving in a sparse forest. Although the forest was sparse, the longest distance between 2 trees was not more than 5 meters. But the droplet flying car could easily fly between 2 trees, which meant that the width of the droplet flying car was definitely less than 5 meters. But if that was the case, how could the width of more than 10 meters around Guhan be explained? Could it be that this droplet flying car uses space-folding technology? A huge exclamation mark appeared in Guhan's mind. Space-folding technology was a technology that humans could only use after mastering the dimensional crystal. They needed to borrow the power of the dimensional crystal to fold a large space into a small tent. But this was a droplet flying car invented by prehistoric humans, so how did they do it? Did they find another way to achieve space-folding technology? Or were the humans 60 million years ago also using dimensional crystals? Chapter 755. Due to the large space, Reina Takasaka and Guhan were able to stay far away from each other. Therefore, nothing interesting happened between the two of them. Guhan's main focus was on studying the flying droplet. After several hours of research, Guhan gradually discovered many more amazing technologies about the flying droplet. Some of them seemed like black technology to modern humans. The black technology of the droplet flying car could be summed up in 4 words, and that was do as you please. Gu Han could almost do anything with his mind. This was not just controlling the droplet flying car to fly. In the hundreds of square meters of folded space of the droplet flying car, Gu Han could use his mind to materialize anything. For example, if Guhan wanted to sleep, a bed would immediately appear next to him. If Guhan wanted to wash his hands, a sink would immediately appear. If he wanted a private bathroom, a fully equipped bathroom would immediately appear. Such an experience made Guhan feel like he had become a god. However, Guhan soon discovered that these things that appeared were the same. If he wanted a chair would indeed appear. However, when he wanted to ask for a red chair, the chair that appeared just now was still the same one. Another example was if Guhan wanted a bed. No matter how detailed Guhan described it, he wanted a small, simple single bed. In reality, a luxurious double bed made of pure wood would always appear. It was the same for the bathroom. If Guhan wanted a squatting toilet, it would always appear as a sitting toilet. Moreover, not everything Guhan wanted would appear. For example, if Guhan wanted a sword, there would be no response from the flying droplet. If Guhan wanted an animal like a cat or a dog, nothing would appear. Combining these phenomena, Guhan quickly figured out that these things that appeared out of nowhere were actually created in advance and hidden in the folded space. Once Guhan received the command from his mind, these things hidden in other spaces would immediately appear beside Guhan. To put it simply, the flying droplet was like a sword wielder with its own dimensional pocket. Once Guhan gave the command, the flying droplet would take out what Guhan wanted from its dimensional pocket. Therefore, when faced with some very detailed requests from Guhan or something that the flying droplet's dimensional pocket did not have, the flying droplet could no longer meet Guhan's needs. After fully understanding this point, Guhan fell into deep thought. The dimensional pocket was something that could only be used by the sword wielder, and it required the sword essence of the sword wielder to be able to freely enter and take it out. If the flying droplet really used the technology of the dimensional pocket, then it must mean that in the Lemurian civilization 60 million years ago, humans could also freely use the sword essence. As for whether there was a sword maiden at that time, only God knew. Moreover, Guhan also vaguely discovered that the ability of the flying droplet was not as simple as it appeared to be. When Guhan's mind controlled the flying droplet, he could vaguely feel that the flying droplet had some deeper functions. But this function showed a state of complete resistance to Guhan's mind. No matter how Guhan conveyed his thoughts, the sealed things did not respond, and Guhan could only give up on this exploration. When it was late at night, Guhan could finally see a brightly lit city in front of him. Guhan had returned to Yuzhang City, and it had only been 8 hours since Guhan set off from Yangjing City. Such a short time not only surprised Guhan, but even Reina Kosaka was completely stunned. It must be known that it took Guhan 7 days to travel from Yuzhang City to Yangjing City in the armored levitating train, but now it only took him 8 hours to return to Yuzhang City. Of course, there were many other factors involved. For example, the armored levitating train used at least 4 days to repair the broken highway between Yuzhang City and Yangjing City. And Guhan's journey was smooth. Not even a dragon-class Yuan Ku could catch up with Guhan's speed. He returned to Yuzhang City almost without stopping. But that wasn't the main reason. The main reason was the droplet flying car's superior ability to ignore terrain. When faced with complicated terrain, the levitating car could only travel at a speed of less than 100 km per hour, sometimes even less than 10 km per hour. But the droplet flying car could ignore the same terrain. It flew over the terrain without even slowing down. That was the main reason why the droplet flying car could return to Yuzhang City in only 8 hours. "Let's go to the city," Guhan said to Reina Kosaka. Reina Kosaka nodded and followed Guhan to Yuzhang City. But halfway there, Reina Takasaka realized that something was amiss. Reina Takasaka had lived in Yuzhang City for less than a month, so she had a basic understanding of the city's geography. Ji Han, who was leading the way, did not walk towards the city gate of Yuzhang City. Instead, he headed towards a location in the northwest corner of the city wall. Even if she was beaten to death, she would not believe that there was a city gate there. "Where are we going?" Reina Kosaka asked. "This isn't the way to the city. I can't go through the gate." Guhan replied faintly. "If it's possible, I hope that no one in Yuzhang City knows that I'm back. Do you understand what I mean? Are you going to do something shameful this time?" Only then did Reina Kosaka realize that Guhan's purpose for coming back was not simple. "It's indeed something shameful." Guhan nodded and admitted readily. "Are you going to report me? I'm not human." "I don't care if you humans live or die," Reina Kosaka muttered softly and said no more. It was only when Reina Kosaka and Guhan arrived at their destination that Reina Kosaka realized that she was wrong. There was indeed a gate at the northwest corner of the city wall. The gate was a hidden door, and no one was guarding it. Looking from outside the city wall, there was no sign of the gate's existence at all. However, as soon as Guhan got close to the city wall, he tapped on a small depression on the wall, and the originally seamless wall slowly opened up. Through the opening, Guhan and Reina Kosaka easily entered Yuzhang City. "How do you know there's a hidden gate here?" Reina Kosaka immediately regretted asking this question. She immediately realized what was going on. A hidden gate like this must have been designed by the Kenjutsu to arrange escape routes or to launch a surprise attack on Yuan Ku. Guhan was once the Kenkaku cabinet master in Yuzhang City, so he must know all kinds of secrets in Yuzhang City. "Sure enough," Guhan answered, "this is an emergency exit. There are more than 20 such exits in Yuzhang City." After walking out of the hidden door, Reina Kosaka returned to Yuzhang City after 2 months. Reina Kosaka hesitated when she saw the familiar yet strange city. She did not know how she should face the city. "Oh right, I have a question for you. Reina Kosaka shouldn't be your real name, right? If I remember correctly, Reina Kosaka is the name of the swordswoman in Yuzhang City. You're just impersonating her. What's your real name?" Guhan suddenly asked. "Fleeting Reina." Reina Takasaka, who was immersed in her own thoughts, blurted out her real name. However, the name was not surprising at all. She had merely changed her surname to Fleeting Time. Guhan had already guessed that Reina Kosaka was Fleeting Time's daughter from his conversation with Fleeting Muki and Fleeting Masa. However, He did not expect her real name to be Raina. It was the same name as the person she had impersonated. My name is not Fleeting Raina, it's Raina Kosaka. Fleeting Raina yelled at Guhan. She seemed to hate the name from the bottom of her heart. Whatever. I'll call you Raina then, said Guhan, and continued walking towards the core area. Guhan had many questions about Fleeting Raina. The most important question was whether Fleeting Time Raina was a human or not. Guhan had witnessed Fleeting Raina's ability to control the air with his own eyes. She did not have any sword maidens in her hands at that time, which meant that Fleeting Raina did not borrow the power of the sword maidens. She had used her own power to control the air. Where did Fleeting Time Raina's power come from? Did she awaken a superpower from a novel? She was able to control the power of the wind with her human body? Or was she the same as Misaka Mikoto, a human from another world? In other words, Yuan-ku? Guhan had been keeping a close eye on Fleeting Raina when she passed through the dimensional barrier of Yuzhang City. If the dimensional barrier was able to obstruct her, Guhan would immediately give up on the idea of letting Fleeting Raina enter Yuzhang City. He would instead send her to the Heaven and Earth Furnace to wait for him. However, nothing out of the ordinary happened when Fleeting Raina passed through the dimensional barrier. Guhan had no choice but to keep his worries to himself. Chapter 756. Guhan had gotten very close to this Grandmaster swordsmith who had destroyed a broken sword. He had been locked up in the prison where Lu Yin had been held. The prison had even made a separate space for his forging laboratory. However, after the complete disappearance of the Sword Maiden, the sword forging guru, who had committed a grave crime, could no longer stay in prison. Instead, she was transferred to Mount Tai Prison, which was directly managed by the Sword Committee, and was guarded by human special forces. Although the guns in the hands of human soldiers were not very effective against Yuan-ku and the swordbearers, they were still very effective against ordinary humans or swordsmiths. This was because these humans did not have personal shields, so they could not resist weapons like guns. In fact, guns could still pose a threat to Yuan-ku and the swordbearers. As long as bullets were made from dimensional alloys of a certain purity, human guns could still cause damage to Yuan-ku and the swordbearers. This was widely known after the true use of dimensional crystals was discovered. After knowing this, humans had once excitedly planned to rebuild their army and use airplanes and cannons to completely annihilate the damned Yuan-ku. Unfortunately, humans soon discovered that this was not realistic. Using dimensional alloys to make guns required a large number of dimensional crystals. For example, a huge mine like the Miling mountain range could not produce 1,000,000 bullets in a year. 1,000,000 bullets did not seem like a lot. Before the apocalypse, when the impoverished Yanghuang Empire, which had no industrial foundation, was attacked by Japan, it would consume about 10 million bullets in a single battle. During the 8-Year War, Yanghuang Empire had consumed a total of 3 billion bullets. This number was because Yanghuang was too poor. On the battlefield in Europe, the rich Americans spent 7 billion bullets a year. The Germans used 3 billion bullets a year. Even the tiny England used more than 2 billion bullets a year, British and French Allied forces. Therefore, 1,000,000 bullets was simply a drop in the bucket in the war against Yuan-ku. In a large-scale battle, the bullets would be used up in less than an hour. By then, these troops could only wait for death. Moreover, for humans at that time, the most important thing was to use dimensional crystals to build a safe giant wall to protect the lives of ordinary humans. Therefore, the plan to build a firearms army was put on hold. In the end, as the sword-bearers grew and took full control of the human regime, the idea of a firearms army was completely abandoned. However, although the idea of using firearms as an army was unrealistic, some of the elite special forces were a good idea. These special forces had excellent marksmanship. With bullets made of high-purity dimensional alloys, they could occasionally blow up mouse-grade or tiger-grade Yuan-ku with a single shot. Unfortunately, special forces and sword-bearers with such qualifications were as rare as the sword-bearers. Not many ordinary humans were willing to be soldiers. Therefore, the number of special forces had been maintained at around a few hundred. They were responsible for guarding some important departments, such as the Mount Tai prison in front of Guhan. Under the guard of these special forces, the entire Mount prison was impregnable. Mount Tai prison was impregnable. Under the threat of metal storms formed by pure dimensional crystals bullets, even the spiritual swordbearers could explode instantly. Therefore, in the past hundreds of years, except for the Great Invasion, when it couldn't be defended, Mount Tai prison had never gone wrong. But now, the time for Mount Tai prison to go wrong had finally arrived. P.S. Regarding the setting of firearms, everyone must feel that it's very abrupt, because there seems to be no foreshadowing in the previous text. It just appeared inexplicably. In fact, in the beginning, the author completely abandoned the setting of firearms. But later, many readers came to find the author, saying that according to the author's setting, firearms could still fight with Yuan Ku. Unless the human collective was mentally retarded, it was impossible not to discover the benefits and feasibility of building a firearms army. This was a huge logical error. The author thought for a long time and felt that the readers were right. Since the dimensional crystals were designed, firearms became a possibility. Unless the author admitted that he was mentally retarded, firearms should exist in the Sword Maiden's world. After resetting, the setting of Firearms Army was hastily added after more than 700 chapters. But please rest assured, the Firearms Army is just a foil. The real worldview will not change on a large scale. Their appearance is not a foreshadowing, but just to make the Sword Maiden's world more perfect. These Special Forces guards of Mount Tai prison were using their sharp eyes to search the surroundings of the prison. Above their heads, the brand new high-energy laser radar had completely covered the entire surrounding environment. Even if a fly flew in, it couldn't escape the eyes of these special forces. This kind of high-energy laser radar was currently the most advanced black technology of mankind. Even if a spirit sword wielder was holding a killing sword maiden, this radar could detect him. Therefore, these special forces trusted the radar in their hands very much, which was more trust than their own eyes. It was reasonable to say that this kind of security was already very tight to the extreme. It was absolutely impossible for anyone to escape this kind of security. However, when all of this was done by a high-level mole, all of this became a complete decoration. Under Lu Shihua's remote control, these radar were collectively blinded. There was obviously a person swaggering under their scanning, but there was not even a fly on the display of these radar. Winter is good. Unlike summer, the whole screen is full of flies that stung people to death. A Special Forces sentry said to his comrade beside him, "Idiot, it's not a fly that stings people, it's a mosquito." The Special Forces soldier who spoke glanced at his comrade with contempt. With just a glance, he seemed to have seen something flash past his line of sight. Not good. There's someone. This Special Forces soldier immediately raised his loaded automatic rifle and shouted, "What are you panicking for? I've been staring at the radar, and there was indeed something flashing past just now. But it's not a person, it's a fly," the comrade said disdainfully. "I see." The nervous Special Forces soldier put down his weapon, let out a long sigh of relief, and patted his comrade on the shoulder. "We will be discharged in a few months. What are you going to do after that?" "Don't worry, I already have an idea," the comrade laughed. "I'm going to be a bodyguard for the beautiful CEO or the campus belle. Then I can get a promotion and a raise in salary, reach the pinnacle of life, and marry a Ms. Perfect." "Why do you have to be a bodyguard for the beautiful CEO or the campus belle?" the other Special Forces soldier asked in confusion. "Also, why can a bodyguard get a promotion and a raise in salary, reach the pinnacle of life, and marry a Ms. Perfect? Is there such a logic?" "Of course there is. This is a true story from before the apocalypse. Someone even recorded it." With that said, the Special Forces soldier clicked on his personal terminal, and a novel titled The Personal Special Forces Bodyguard of the Beautiful President of the City's Campus Belle entered the eyes of the other Special Forces soldier. While the two Special Forces soldiers were reading the novel and looking forward to a promotion and a raise in salary, Guhan had already snuck into Mount Tai prison. Guhan did not bring fleeting time Lena with him. Instead, he asked her to find a hotel to stay in and wait for him to contact her. Guhan was confident that he could sneak into Mount Tai prison alone, but he did not have the confidence to bring fleeting time Lena with him. According to the information that Guhan had, the broken sword was still in the hands of the Grandmaster Swordsmith. It seemed that the Grandmaster Swordsmith had not given up on his experiment, and was determined to carry on with it. The broken sword was hidden within Mount Tai prison. Once the special forces of the Swordsmith Association arrived, the Grandmaster Swordsmith would have to reforge the broken sword and return it to the earth. Through long-distance communication with Lu Shihua, Ji Yuhan quickly found the storage room where the broken sword was. Similarly, under Lu Shihua's remote control, the door that was protected by 36 layers of encryption was completely opened in less than a second. One couldn't blame the door for its poor defense. If the owner opened the door faster, there would be no need for the door to exist anymore. The moment the door was closed and the lights were switched on, Guhan saw the broken sword in the display cabinet. The blade of the sword that was originally bright was now gray, like a rusted machine. It gave off a strange feeling of dilapidation. The blade of the sword had been split into two, and the jagged cut on the blade showed that the ancient sword had been through an intense and cruel battle. In the end, it was broken into two and given to the Grandmaster Swordsmith as a test subject. In the end, the Grandmaster Swordsmith destroyed its own soul. "I'm sorry." Looking at the dagger, Ji Yuhan was silent for a long time. Then, he very respectfully bent his waist and bowed 3 times to the broken dagger. Each time, his head touched his knees before he straightened his back. This was Guhan's apology to the broken sword, as well as humanity's apology to her. Her soul did not die in the hands of Yuan Ku, but was destroyed in the hands of humanity. Goddess of Zhongdian, instead of silently mixing with the soil, why not lend your body to a comrade and let her use your body to obtain a new life? Isn't this a kind of rebirth for you? I hope you can understand my actions. If you can't, then I, Guhan, will bear all the sins. This has nothing to do with King Yu, Guhan muttered to the sword of Zhongdian. Chapter 757. The broken sword in Guhan's hand was called Zhongdian's sword, and it was an ancient sword maiden. According to the records, this sword maiden seemed to be the weapon of an assassin from the Middle Ages. This assassin was unknown, so this Zhongdian sword was also unknown. Naturally, the Zhongdian sword's ability was also unknown. It was ranked at the bottom of the ancient sword record, around 200th to 300th from the bottom. It was precisely because Zhongdian sword's ability was not strong that the Sword Council mercilessly handed it over to this swordsmith grandmaster to experiment on after it broke. If it had been an ancient sword maiden ranked 200th to 300th from the ancient sword record, the Sword Council would not have taken the risk to give it to this grandmaster. The entire matter could be said to be Zhongdian sword's sorrow, the swordsmith grandmaster's sorrow, and the Sword Council's sorrow. King Yu, you can take a look. This is your future body. Guhan shouted King Yu's name, but he took out Juzi's sword. This was because when he tried to bring King Yu's soul out of the game, King Yu's soul and Juzi's soul were brought into Juzi's sword's body. Thus, Juzi's sword had 2 sword maidens' souls. However, according to King Yu's complaints, staying in Juzi's sword's body was like having a very narrow attic. He was just a passerby in Juzi County's body that could be chased away at any time. If Juzi's sword was unhappy, King Yu's soul would immediately be chased out of Juzi's sword and disappear into the air. Is this the future me? Should I change my name to Zhongdian's sword? The moment King Yu saw his body, he was incomparably excited. But after the excitement, King Yu calmed down and suddenly felt a sense of unwillingness. This Zhongdian sword is actually ranked in the bottom 200th among ancient sword maidens. If I enter her body, wouldn't I go from being one of the best famed sword maidens to a useless, trashy ancient sword maidens? Thinking of this, King Yu became even more sorrowful. I don't want that. Suddenly, King Yu said unexpectedly, I don't want to enter this Zhongdian sword's body. I don't want to become as useless as her. A sword maiden like her will only break in 2. I'd rather die than become a sword maiden like her. This sudden turn of events caused Guhan's expression to instantly become complicated and angry. He spent so much effort and finally found this broken sword. He also found a suitable body for King Yu. But at this time, King Yu told her to give up. Then wouldn't her hard work be in vain? King Yu, stop messing around. Guhan said calmly, don't worry, as long as you are in my hands, I will never let you break. I will protect you forever, hold you, and grow old with you until the end of my life. For Guhan, this was a very rare thing to say. With Guhan's personality, it was rare for him to say such sweet words. However, these sweet words were useless in King Yu's ears. King Yu seemed to have fallen into a trance. I don't want it. I'd rather die than become a sword maiden like this. I'm fine staying in Ju's body. I'll stay like this for now. Be obedient. Ji Yuhan sighed and reached for the Zhongdian sword in the display case. As he did so, he said to King Yu, calm down for a while. Once you're done, you'll realize that this is your best choice. No. Never. King Yu's trance became even more intense. Even if I enter the heaven and earth furnace, I'd rather my soul dissipate than run into this trash sword maiden's body. To me, this is worse than death. Ignoring King Yu's roars in his mind, he held the broken Zhongdian sword and prepared to leave Mount Tai prison. However, what Guhan could not take was that King Yu's roars in his mind became louder and louder. In the end, it reached the level of a roar. It was as if there were two heavy subwoofers in his head and these two heavy subwoofers were making annoying noises at their loudest. This gave Guhan a headache. Juzi, can you make her shut up? Guhan felt helpless and could only ask Juzi. Yes. Juzi's answer was very concise. Then make her shut up. Guhan's order was equally concise. After Guhan's order was given, King Yu's voice instantly disappeared from Guhan's mind. The entire world instantly fell silent. Juzi, how did you do it? Guhan, who had relaxed, asked Juzi. At this moment, he was a little worried that Juzi had used some forceful method. For example, she had suppressed King Yu's soul or forced her soul out of the Juzi sword. If that happened, Guhan would regret it endlessly. I only sealed the connection between the Juzi sword and Master's soul. Juzi's words were true. When Juzi spoke, King Yu's crazy voice appeared in Guhan's mind again. As Juzi spoke, King Yu's voice also disappeared. Then won't it be hard on you? I'll let you bear this alone. Guhan suddenly felt a little embarrassed. Even he couldn't bear King Yu's crazy voice. Letting Juzi bear it alone must be very painful. Sister King Yu's soul is in my body, so Juzi can also feel her pain. At this point, Juzi fell silent. Master, there's something Juzi doesn't know if she should say. Say it. There's nothing that can't be said between the sword maiden and the sword wielder, Guhan said without hesitation. Master. In fact, Juzi knew Big Sister King Yu's true pain. Big Sister King Yu didn't feel pain because her power had weakened. She was worried that after she lost her original power, Master would put her on the shelf. When Master fights, Big Sister King Yu can only watch from the side and can't help Master with anything. This is what really hurts Big Sister King Yu. She only wants to fight for Master. This time, it was Guhan's turn to fall silent. However, Guhan didn't stay silent for too long before ordering Juzi, turn on the sound. I can't help King Yu, and I can't let her wait any longer. Let me bear the pain in her heart with her. As a result, Guhan stayed in the storage room and sat cross-legged on the ground without moving. He silently listened to King Yu's painful roars in his mind. After tens of minutes, King Yu's roars turned into unbridled cries. In the end, the cries became softer and softer until there was no more sound. Guhan's mind once again became completely quiet. What? Are you done venting? Guhan asked in his mind. Master, Big Sister King Yu's soul has consumed too much energy. She's tired and has fallen asleep. The one who answered Guhan was Juzi. Then let's go. My legs are numb from sitting too. Guhan bitterly smiled and stood up. After walking out of the storage room, he moved along a different route and prepared to leave Mount Tai prison. This new route required him to pass through a prison area and many prison gates. It was already 4 o'clock in the morning. Even the noisiest prison had quietened down. However, Ji Yuhan could clearly hear shouts coming from one of the gates of the prison. Let me out. It doesn't matter if I die, but Zhongdian's sword isn't dead yet. Let me out, I want to save her. Clearly, the one who shouted this was none other than the sword-forging grandmaster who had turned Zhongdian's sword into this state. Ji Yuhan was disdainful of this guy, but he couldn't pretend that he didn't hear what he said at this time. He said that Zhongdian's sword was still alive. Didn't that mean that Zhongdian's sword's soul was still in its body? If Guhan took Zhongdian's sword to the worldly furnace, it would only be a waste of effort. King Yu could not possess the sword maiden's body that had its own soul. Of course, it was also possible that this sword-forging grandmaster knew that he would die for sure, so he wanted to say some nonsense to deceive others and stall for as much time as possible so that he could live. After hesitating for a while, Guhan felt that he could not take any risks in this matter. If what he said was true, after the worldly furnace opened, King Yu, who could not possess the sword maiden's body, would be forced out of the body by its original owner. In the end, he would be burned into nothingness by the worldly furnace's flames and completely cease to exist in this world. This was something that Guhan could not accept. Zhao Hao, also known as Grandmaster Tianri, was yelling helplessly in his cell. He had been yelling for a whole hour already. Aside from a prison guard who came to look at him and scolded him a little, no one else paid any attention to him. However, Zhao Hao did not give up. He decided to shout until his throat was completely destroyed. Otherwise, a sword maiden that could still be saved would be forcefully melted into molten iron and die for real. Just as Zhao Hao's throat was about to become hoarse, he finally heard the long-awaited sound of the door turning. Shortly after, a man in ordinary clothes walked in. Strange. Why isn't this man wearing a police uniform? The prison guards in Taishan prison naturally had to wear police uniforms, and at 4 o'clock in the morning, no one would come here except for the prison guards. Therefore, Ji Yu Han, who appeared in regular clothes, seemed particularly strange. I'm a sword wielder sent by the sword committee. Ji Yu Han's personal terminal popped up his identity as a swordsman. Taishan prison reported your case to the sword committee, so the sword committee sent me here to understand the situation. Please tell me your situation again. All right. Guhan's explanation was reasonable, so Zhao Hao did not doubt it at all. He then told Guhan everything. Chapter 758. Zhao Hao could actually be considered a good person, as his intentions had always been for the sake of humanity and the sword ladies. This could be seen from the topic he had researched at the beginning. The full title of Zhao Hao's original research topic was How to Quickly Repair Broken Natural Sword Ladies with Artificial Intervention. Simply put, it was about repairing broken sword ladies manually. Up until now, there had been no effective way to repair broken sword ladies. Some sword-forging grandmasters could rely on their own abilities to repair a portion of broken natural sword ladies, but there were far too few of them, even rarer than Jendi. The small portion that sword-forging grandmasters could repair was too small, amounting to less than 10% of the total number of broken swords. Thus, after the Great Apocalypse, the most common way to repair sword ladies was to wait silently. They were placed in the sword burial grounds, a place that had the miraculous ability to repair sword ladies, and waited for these broken sword ladies to slowly repair themselves in the sword burial grounds. This process would take at least 50 years. For example, Liuonian Ling's leisurely celestial sword had been placed in the sword burial grounds after it had been broken. It had only been a few years since the leisurely celestial sword had finished repairing itself. The prerequisite for this was that the sword lady's soul had to be preserved. Once the soul in the sword lady's body was lost, the sword lady could only merge with the earth. After Zhao Hao became a sword-forging grandmaster, he was determined to change this situation. He researched a completely new method to repair broken swords, allowing the sword ladies placed in the sword burial grounds to see the light of day once more. Thus, Zhao Hao's original intentions were completely good. It was just that Zhao Hao had gradually gone astray in his research. He had originally planned to repair sword ladies, but he had accidentally discovered a method to make the broken fragments of a natural sword lady into an independent body. This method was to split the sword lady's soul in the broken sword, and then use the artificial sword lady's manufacturing technology and the high-purity dimensional crystal sword lady's original material formula to repair the two broken fragments into two identical natural sword ladies. This was actually similar to the survival ability of earthworms. If you used a sharp knife to cut an earthworm into two, after a period of time, you would find that the two parts of the earthworm did not die, but became two independent complete bodies, becoming two earthworms. Just by listening to it, one could tell how much this method violated human ethics. However, at that time, Zhao Hao had already entered a state of madness. He carried out the experiment without any hesitation. Then the experiment was reported by his disciple, who could not accept what he had done, and he became a prisoner and was locked up in prison. However, when Zhao Hao's experimental plan and detailed experimental records were handed over to the Sword Committee, the entire Sword Committee was shocked by his ideas and was even more tempted by his plan. If Zhao Hao's experiment was successful, then wouldn't the more than 800 broken swords in the humans' possession become 1,600 swords that could be used by humans? This would undoubtedly greatly increase the strength of the human race. In the face of survival, any ethical relationship was temporarily cast aside. At that time, under the dictatorship of Sword Immortal White Stallion Zhu Wudao reported Zhao Hao's matter to the Sword Committee headquarters, and then applied to allow Zhao Hao to continue his research. It was said that the Sword Committee headquarters held a meeting to discuss this for a long time, and in the end, they tacitly agreed to Zhu Wudao's plan. Thus, Zhao Hao's research could continue in the laboratory, until 3 days ago, when he completely courted death and completely destroyed the soul of Zhongdian's sword, which was the subject of the experiment. Actually, I've already carried out the preliminary research very well. After analyzing the original material of Zhongdian's sword, I've obtained steel that is exactly the same as the original material, and I can guarantee that the 2 Zhongdian swords that are repaired will be exactly the same. Zhao Hao told Guhan honestly. The most crucial part of the entire experiment is the step of splitting the Sword Lady's soul into 2. How to ensure that after splitting the Sword Lady's soul into 2, the soul of the Sword Lady can become 2 independent bodies and not dissipate. This is the most difficult problem. I've researched this problem for 30 years, and I finally made a breakthrough last month. Zhao Hao's face revealed a blissful expression, but this blissful expression soon turned into one of bitterness. But I failed in the end. The soul of Zhongdian's sword, which was used for the experiment, disappeared the moment it was split. No matter how the apparatus scanned it, it could not find the Sword Lady's soul. Then, they determined that Zhongdian's sword's soul had completely dissipated. Zhao Hao mumbled, and his emotions immediately became agitated. But I couldn't accept it, I couldn't believe it. I've researched for a whole 30 years. I've thought of every step, and I've used experiments to verify every detail. All the steps are feasible, but why did I fail when I put them together? Zhao Hao's expression became more and more pained as he spoke, but it also became more and more passionate. So I thought. I've been thinking. No matter what others do to me, or where they want to lock me up, I don't care. I've been thinking about this problem day and night, and it was only an hour ago that I finally figured it out. I didn't fail. I definitely didn't fail. I'm a winner, and I've succeeded. Zhao Hao suddenly grabbed Guhan's hand tightly. Zhongdian's sword didn't die. She only fell into a deep sleep the moment they were separated. Her soul must still be alive. That's impossible. Upon hearing Zhao Hao's words, Guhan replied resolutely. 3 grandmasters from Yuzhang City conducted an appraisal of Zhongdian's sword at the same time. These 3 grandmasters used their own reputations to guarantee that there is no longer any Sword Lady's soul in Zhongdian's sword. Could it be that those 3 grandmasters were lying? There were a total of 4 sword forging grandmasters in Yuzhang City. From the perspective of a sword forging grandmaster, the ability of a sword forging grandmaster was equal to that of an immortal sword wielder. The remaining sword forging grandmaster had also guaranteed that there was no soul in Zhongdian's sword, so it was naturally more credible than Zhao Hao's words alone. However, one could hear the agitation in Guhan's voice. This was because Guhan's words were not only for Zhao Hao's ears, but also for Guhan himself. Unlike Zhao Hao, who looked forward to proving himself and that Zhongdian's sword was still alive, Guhan actually hoped that Zhongdian's sword's soul did not exist. Otherwise, where would King Yu's soul go? They're right. Zhongdian's sword's soul is indeed not in those 2 broken swords. Unexpectedly, Zhao Hao agreed with the other 3 grandmasters' judgment. However, he then said, Zhongdian's sword's soul is not in Zhongdian's sword, but that doesn't mean that her soul has disappeared. Her soul is still alive. What do you mean? How is that possible? It's impossible for a sword lady's soul to exist in the air. Without the protection of the sword, her soul would have completely disintegrated in less than 10 seconds. Is there a problem with that? Guhan said in disbelief. That's right. It's true that a sword lady's soul can't exist in the air for more than 10 seconds, but who said that Zhongdian lady's soul dissipated in the air? Is there anyone who can prove this? Zhao Hao quickly said. No one can prove that, but no one can prove that Zhongdian lady's soul is still alive. Guhan answered stiffly. No. I can prove it. I can prove that Zhongdian lady's soul is still alive. Zhao Hao became even more agitated. How are you going to prove it? I can bring you to Zhongdian lady's soul. Isn't that the best proof? Zhao Hao grabbed Guhan with both hands. Then where do you think her soul is? Guhan glared at Zhao Hao. You have to give me enough reason to convince me. Otherwise, I'll treat it as something you made up to survive. Zhongdian lady's soul is in my scalpel. Zhao Hao answered without hesitation. Scalpel? Guhan was obviously stunned. Zhao Hao continued, it's all my fault. I shouldn't have forged a scalpel made of the same material as the Zhongdian sword so that I could cut Zhongdian lady's soul faster. At the moment of cutting, Zhongdian lady's soul was not distributed into the two broken swords as planned. Instead, it was transferred into the scalpel. It's all my fault. I was so angry that I thought I killed Zhongdian lady. I was in a state of confusion and didn't think of that at all. Zhao Hao's face was filled with regret. I only figured it out just now. Since the scalpel is made of the same material as the Zhongdian sword, Zhongdian lady's soul would naturally be transferred into the scalpel that was closest to her, and not the broken sword that was slightly further away. But the scalpel is just a small knife, and it's a knife. How can it be integrated with a sword lady's soul? Guhan mumbled to himself. The scalpel is just a term passed down from before the apocalypse. From its shape, both sides of the scalpel are sharp blades. It's completely different from a knife that has one thick side and one sharp side. Actually, the scalpel should be called a scalpel sword. Zhao Hao explained with a bitter smile. This was also how the academic world distinguished swords and knives after studying the existence of sword ladies for a long time. It explained why swords could become sword ladies, but not knives. P.S. Looking at it from a practical point of view, there are some who are double-edged. However, such knives are rare, so this book automatically ignores these rare knives. Here's the explanation. Now, there are two sword ladies' souls in the scalpel. This is a very dangerous thing. After being cut, the sword lady's soul has to be repaired by a soul-repairing fluid to regain its rationality. Otherwise, they will be like two wild beasts that will devour each other. One will only stop when the other is bitten to death. I suspect that the two souls in the scalpel are about to win. Once one of the souls fails, the other soul will definitely be pushed into the air. By then, both souls won't be able to survive, and Zhongdian lady will really die. Zhao Hao said anxiously at the end. He believed that Liu Lei would naturally help him deal with it, so Guhan did not have to worry too much. In Zhao Hao's eyes, Guhan must have been communicating with the Sword Committee just now. After obtaining the Sword Committee's approval, he would immediately bring him to the lab. Therefore, Zhao Hao did not doubt Guhan's orders at all. He simply packed up his things and left the prison cell with Guhan. Fortunately, when he brought Zhao Hao out of Mount Tai prison, no evil moths appeared. Everything went according to Guhan's plan. Under Lu Shihua's cover, they quietly left the heavily guarded Mount Tai prison. It was not until 5 or 6 hours later that Lu Shihua's remote control of Mount Tai prison ended. It was only then that the warden realized that Zhao Hao had disappeared from the prison. After that, the entire Mount Tai prison system was in a mess. More than 10 prison guards under the warden's rank were all fired. The few special forces also realized their wish to retire from the military. However, only God knew whether they became the personal special forces bodyguards of the city's beautiful campus belle. In fact, Guhan's actions that night could be summed up in one sentence: he went from one prison to another. However, compared to Mount Tai prison, the other prison's defense was practically non-existent. There were only a few police detectives guarding the entrance. Lu Shihua disguised himself slightly, and Guhan successfully brought him into its original lab. The rest of the matter went smoothly. Zhao Hao quickly found the scalpel on his table. Therefore, Zhao Hao immediately activated his soul-scanning equipment and began to scan the scalpel. He discovered that things were just as he had imagined. There were indeed 2 souls of sword maidens in the scalpel. Oh no! One of the sword maiden's soul is about to be squeezed out of the scalpel, Zhao Hao suddenly exclaimed. The smile on his face instantly disappeared, replaced by extreme anxiety. Just like what Zhao Hao had said earlier, the battle between the souls in the scalpel was about to end. One of the souls gradually showed signs of weakness, and was finally squeezed to the edge of the scalpel. Perhaps in a few minutes, this soul would be squeezed out of the scalpel and completely disappear into thin air. The other soul was not much better. In a situation where it had exhausted a large amount of soul power in the battle, and could not be replenished by the soul restoration fluid, this victorious soul would gradually disintegrate and disappear sooner or later. In other words, if Guhan had come a few minutes later, Zhongdian's soul would definitely have died. It's over. Zhao Hao, who understood this scene, slumped to the ground, despair written all over his face. It's over. It's too late. I can't save these 2 souls. I'm a sinner through and through. What's wrong? Aren't the 2 souls still in the scalpel? Can't you separate them right now? Seeing Zhao Hao's despairing expression, Ji Yuhan asked in a puzzled manner. So what if they're separated? Zhao Hao said weakly. After they're separated, they have to be placed in their original broken sword fragments. I originally wanted to ask you to apply to the sword committee to bring the broken sword fragments here after confirming that the souls are in the scalpel. Only then can I separate them. But the speed of their battle far exceeded my expectations. I originally estimated that they would fight for at least another 2 days, but I didn't expect it to have already reached such a tragic stage. I'm useless, I'm the one who caused their death. Zhao Hao wailed, but suddenly felt something thrown on his leg. Zhao Hao looked down and saw that it was the remains of the 2 broken swords of Zhongdian. Sir, how did this broken sword? You don't have to ask about that. Hurry up and separate the souls. You don't have time anymore. Hearing Guhan's words, Zhao Hao instantly jumped up from the ground. He grabbed the scalpel and rolled back to his workbench with the broken sword. Fortunately, in order to protect the scene, all the equipment in the entire workshop was not moved. Zhao Hao could immediately use these equipment that he was extremely familiar with to carry out his work. After working for about 20 minutes, Zhao Hao, who was fully focused, finally relaxed. He had successfully placed the 2 souls back into the broken sword, and Zhongdian had regained its vitality. Seeing this scene, Guhan's eyes were filled with both joy and pain. He was naturally happy that the soul of a sword maiden had been redeemed by him. He was painful because when this sword body could not be used, when would the day of King Yu's rebirth be? Guhan sighed and prepared to leave the laboratory. Since Zhao Hao had already repaired Zhongdian's soul, there was no need for Guhan to steal Zhongdian's body. In this way, there was no need for Guhan to hide his identity. Guhan only needed to confess everything to his master, Liu Lei. He believed that with Liu Lei's help, he would be able to quickly fabricate the truth that Guhan had seen through the information that Zhongdian's soul was not dead. Then, he would rush back to Yuzhang City to help repair Zhongdian's body. Of course, this explanation was full of loopholes. Anyone with a bit of intelligence would be able to deduce that there were many things wrong with this explanation. However, the matter had a comedic ending. This was a family matter in Yuzhang City. Since Sword Immortal Nine Heavens Liu Lei, who was in charge of Yuzhang City, did not pursue this matter, outsiders could not say anything. Was it a bad thing for Guhan to save a sword maiden? Therefore, Guhan decided to leave. After explaining to Liu Lei that night, he would return to Yangjing City and continue looking for a chance to revive King Yu. Sir, where are you going? Guhan had just taken a step when he heard Zhao Hao ask anxiously behind him. Your matter is over, and there is no need for me to stay here. You can rest in the laboratory for a while. The Sword Committee will send someone else to deal with this matter soon, Guhan said to Zhao Hao plainly. Sir, you're not the real swordsman sent by the Sword Committee, right? Zhao Hao suddenly asked. That's right. Gu Han admitted readily. He was not interested in how Zhao Hao discovered his identity. This was because he did not deliberately hide his actions along the way. As one of the 4 sword-forging grandmasters in Yuzhang City, Zhao Hao's intelligence was naturally higher than that of ordinary people. It was not surprising that he could discover his identity through some details. Then let me make a bold guess. Sir, you want to steal the broken sword of Zhongdian? Zhao Hao said again. Yes. Gu Han still admitted. Then let me ask one more thing. Sir, are you the sword-bearer of Zhongdian? He thought Zhao Hao would keep guessing correctly, but he guessed wrong here. He actually guessed that Gu Han was the sword-bearer of Zhongdian. This was 1,000 miles wrong. Chapter 760. Sir, you're really devoted to Zhongdian sword lady, Zhao Hao exclaimed. Sir, you must be unwilling to see Zhongdian sword lady turn into a puddle of molten iron, so you want to steal her broken sword and keep it by your side forever, right? Zhao Hao had guessed that Gu Han was the sword wielder of Zhongdian's sword. It was not strange when one thought about it, because other than the sword wielder of Zhongdian's sword, no one would take such a huge risk to steal a broken sword. Zhao Hao did not expect that someone would want to use the broken sword's sword mistress to be reborn as another sword mistress. From a certain point of view, this was even more despicable than Zhao Hao's research. Gu Han did not answer Zhao Hao's question. His attitude of neither admitting nor denying confirmed Zhao Hao's guess. The sword wielder before him was undoubtedly the sword mistress of Zhongdian's sword. However, Zhao Hao did not know that the real sword wielder of Zhongdian's sword had already died in battle after Zhongdian's sword broke. This sword wielder had been an ancient sword wielder for over 40 years. When Yuan Ku rushed out of the core zone's quantum teleportation formation, he did not show any fear, nor did he choose to escape. Instead, he stood closely with his sword mistress and used his life to compose a great song of praise for the sword wielder, although no one had ever sung this battle song, and no one really cared about this sword wielder's heroic battle. Why are you telling me this? Is there a reason? Gu Han turned around and asked. Of course there's a reason. Zhao Hao nodded. I should have done my research without any hesitation, but without your help today, I'm afraid I've made a huge mistake. I'm afraid I've already made a huge mistake, so I have to tell you something and let you make a choice. What is it? I want to tell you that my research is already halfway done. Next, I only need to use the materials I prepared to repair these 2 broken swords. Then, I'll be able to obtain 2 identical sword mistresses of Zhongdian's sword. That's great. Isn't that what you've always wanted? Gu Han said. This is indeed what I want, but this isn't what you want, said Zhao Hao with a sigh. Once my experiment succeeds, Sword Lady Zhongdian will be reborn. But if that's the case, the original Sword Lady of Zhongdian Dian will also disappear completely. The reborn Zhongdian Dian will have nothing to do with you, my lord. You have to synchronize again to become a Sword Lady. But Lady Zhongdian's purple palace still has Lady Zhongdian's sword mark. I think Lady Zhongdian knows better than me what this means. Gu Han chose to remain silent. He knew what Zhao Hao wanted to express. After the wielder's sword lady was broken, the sword scar in the wielder's purple palace would not disappear. In other words, the wielder would not be able to synchronize with the ancient sword-grade sword lady. In vulgar terms, this was called being a dog in the manger, and this occupation was the life of the sword-bearer. If Gu Han was really the wielder of the sword of final destination, then there were only 2 paths in front of Gu Han. He could either send the sword of final destination to the sword burial ground and wait for it to slowly recover, or he could find a sword-forging grandmaster and ask them to find a way to repair the sword of final destination. If he really followed Zhao Hao's plan and split the sword of final destination into 2 independent entities, even if the sword of final destination was reborn, it would no longer have any connection with its wielder. The wielder would also lose his ancient sword-grade sword lady forever. That was why Zhao Hao wanted to ask Gu Han about Gu Han's decision at this juncture. Unfortunately, Gu Han was not the wielder of the sword of final destination, so there was nothing for him to worry about. He said straightforwardly, just do it according to your plan. If you really succeed, it will be the fortune of the entire human race. You don't have to worry about these small things. Lord is so righteous. I, Zhao Hao, admire you. Hearing Guhan's words, Zhao Hao sincerely admired Guhan. From the time Guhan had snuck into Mount Tai prison to steal the Sword of Final Destination, Zhao Hao could tell that Guhan had deep feelings for the Sword of Final Destination. However, with such deep feelings, when faced with the overall situation of the entire human race, Guhan had decisively given up on his own interests and chosen the interests of the human race. How could Zhao Hao not admire this? Haha. Actually, Lord, you don't have to give up like this. I, Zhao Hao, have a way to let you be together with the Sword Lady of Final Destination again. It turned out that Zhao Hao was just messing around with Ji Yu Han. Now, he was telling Ji Yu Han that he already had a solution to the problem. What idea do you have? It's very simple. Since I, Zhao Hao, can split the Sword Lady of Final Destination's soul, I can put them back together, Zhao Hao said with a smile. But if you put the soul back together, what will happen to your research? Guhan asked. The research can still continue. Zhao Hao laughed. Actually, my most important goal is to prove that the two swords of Final Destination made from my special materials are the same as the real Sword of Final Destination. They can both become the bodies of natural sword ladies. Later, I'll fuse the Lady of Final Destination's soul back together and place it into one of the broken swords. Then, I'll use the materials I've developed to successfully repair this short sword. If this repaired broken sword can reconnect with the Lady of Final Destination's sword mark in your hands and become a sword lady, it will prove that my research has succeeded. At the same time, I can return the Lady of Final Destination to you. Isn't that killing two birds with one stone? Zhao Hao said with a proud expression. He was waiting for Guhan to thank him. However, Zhao Hao didn't know that his words had a completely different meaning in Guhan's ears. If it was really as Zhao Hao said, and only one of the two broken swords was used for the rebirth of the Sword of Final Destination, didn't that mean that after the other broken sword was repaired, it would become an empty body, perfect for King Yu to use? Good. Good idea. Guhan revealed a pleading expression. Lord Grandmaster, I'll leave everything to you. Can you repair it now? I can't stay here for too long, or else I'll be locked up in the disciplinary committee. Millimeter, you've done me a favor, this is nothing, Zhao Hao said with a smile. He seemed to think of something, and his expression suddenly became extremely awkward. This might really have to wait a little longer. Although it's easier to fuse the souls again than to cut them apart, it requires an extremely important item, which is the soul restoration fluid. I must use the soul restoration fluid to strengthen the two souls that are already extremely weak, and use the soul restoration fluid as a dissolving agent so that the two souls can slowly fuse together in the soul restoration fluid. But the Sword Committee only gives me 1 bottle of soul recovery fluid every year, and I've already used the bottle this year. I'm afraid it'll take some effort to get another bottle. Can you wait a few more days? No, wait a few more weeks. Zhao Hao smiled bitterly. The soul restoration fluid was actually the soul restoration fluid, which was the crucial fluid that Wen Maiyun had used for her rebirth. It was just that the swordsmiths and the doctors had different names for it. The soul restoration fluid was extremely rare, and there were not many bottles produced in the entire Yuzhang city in a year. Only a grandmaster swordsmith like Zhao Hao had a quota of 1 bottle every year, and it was extravagantly used as a research material. Other swordsmiths could not even dream of seeing it. If Zhao Hao wanted to get another bottle, forget about a few weeks, he might not even be able to get one in a few months. How could Ji Yu Han have the time to wait for him for a few weeks? Hence, Guhan directly took out a bottle of soul restoration fluid from his dimensional bag and placed it in front of Zhao Hao. Hurry up, I'm in a hurry. This bottle of soul restoration fluid was given to Guhan by Liu Lei to replenish the portion of soul restoration fluid that had already been used in the immortal sword-grade medical pod. Unfortunately, things were urgent, so Guhan could only give this bottle of soul restoration fluid to Zhao Hao. Sir, who exactly are you? Only then did Zhao Hao realize that the swordsmiths in front of him had an extraordinary status in Yuzhang City. What swordsmiths could casually take out a bottle of soul restoration fluid from their dimensional bag? At the very least, they had to be a direct descendant or successor of an emperor swordsman. Zhao Hao did not say anything else, nor did he ask any more questions. He picked up the bottle of soul restoration fluid and immediately started working. Not only did Zhao Hao need to reintegrate the two souls, but he also needed to use the forging electric furnace in the workshop to repair the two broken swords with the materials he had made himself into two complete swordsmiths. By the time all this work was done, the sky had already brightened. Sounds of footsteps could be heard from around the laboratory. This was the prison guards on duty. They would soon discover that the previously closed laboratory had begun working again. Oh no! Why are the lights in the laboratory lit up? Everyone, be on guard. A warning cry came from outside the laboratory. It seemed that they had discovered the situation here. Sir. Fortunately, I did not disappoint you. At this moment, Zhao Hao placed the two brand new Zhongdian swords in front of Gu Han. Gu Han carefully observed the two Zhongdian swords, and found that one of them was no different from a normal natural swordsmith's. It was full of life. The other one was much duller, without the slightest trace of life. It was not even comparable to a man-made ship Maiden. Clearly, this was the soulless sword suitable for the King of Yu's body. As expected of Grandmaster Tianri. Your swordsmithing skills leave me speechless. Gu Han praised sincerely. I wouldn't dare. Zhao Hao smiled. Sir, you'd better escape quickly. Otherwise, when the prison guards rush in, your identity will be exposed. No. I want you to leave with me. For some reason, Gu Han suddenly changed his mind and wanted to bring Grandmaster Tianri Zhao Hao along. Don't worry about me. These prison guards won't dare to do anything to me. Zhao Hao gestured for him not to worry. Anyway, the Zhongdian swords have already been repaired. No matter how big a mistake I made, I don't deserve to die. At most, I'll return to Mount Tai prison and stay for a few years. Just leave me here. Hurry up and leave. Sorry. Unfortunately, Gu Han did not want to waste any more words with Zhao Hao. A sword chi struck Zhao Hao's Fengkai acupoint, and Zhao Hao instantly fainted. Gu Han carried Zhao Hao, and the moment the prison guards rushed into the laboratory, he ran away with Zhao Hao. Before the prison guards could even see his figure clearly, Gu Han had already left the prison. Chapter 761. He still doesn't want to eat. A middle-aged man with black hair mixed with half of his white hair asked a woman beside him who was holding a plate of steaming hot rice. Sigh. The woman shook her head. Child's father, I think it's better to call the doctor over again and let them give the little horse another nutrient injection. Otherwise, the child's body won't be able to take it. The doctor already said that it's not good to give too many nutrient injections. If the child's stomach function deteriorates, it will be even more troublesome. The middle-aged man took the plate of food from the woman's hands and cursed, F***ck, I'll personally deliver it to him. If he doesn't eat, I'll break his legs. Dad. You're wrong. Big brother isn't even afraid of death right now. Why would he be afraid of you breaking his legs? An 11 or 12-year-old little girl beside the man happily said heartlessly. She didn't seem to feel the pain of her big brother who was on a hunger strike. Ding dong. At this time, the doorbell rang. The mother hurriedly went to the door and opened the video surveillance on the door. She saw a young man standing at the door of their house. Who is it? Why did he come here so early in the morning? The middle-aged man said with some dissatisfaction. It wasn't even 8 a.m. yet. What kind of guest would choose this time to come and visit? It's Little Han. Little Han is here. The mother looked at the surveillance and said with a pleasant surprise. You're saying that Gu Han is here. The man's expression was also happy. I heard that he went to Yangjing City to participate in some competition. Why would he suddenly come to our house? All right, Dad. Hurry up and open the door. As long as big brother Gu Han is here, stupid brother will eat. The little girl said excitedly. She was especially excited about Gu Han's arrival. That's right, the person standing at the door of this house was Gu Han. I believe that everyone has already guessed that this house wasn't someone else. It was the house of Gu Han's childhood sweetheart, Song Hammer. Song Hammer's house was the only place where Gu Han could receive the warmth of a family. Therefore, the relationship between Gu Han and Song Hammer's family was especially good. Papa Song. Mama Song. Sorry to disturb you so early. As soon as the door opened, Guhan said to Song Hammer's family with a smile. This kind of smile that was as warm as the spring breeze, this kind of smile with the warmth of family, was a smile that Guhan would rarely show even in front of his sword ladies. Child, what do you mean by disturbing? This is your home. Why are you treating me like an outsider? Mema Song intimately pulled Guhan into her embrace and pinched Guhan's face, waist, buttocks, and hands. Then, she nodded with satisfaction. Your flesh is still there. It seems that you've taken good care of yourself these days. I'm relieved. Little Han. Didn't I remember you participating in the 8 Academies assembly? Could it be that the competition was already over? Calculating the time, it doesn't seem right. Compared to Mother Song's intimacy, Papa Song was a lot colder. However, the concern he had for Guhan couldn't be concealed from his words. The competition hasn't started yet. I discovered something at the last minute and rushed back from Yangjing City. The first thing I did was to look for Papa Song and Mama Song. Guhan spoke 30% of the truth and 70% of the lies. Did you say that you came back alone? Papa Song was taken aback. Then, he said in a reproachful tone, it must have been a dangerous journey. How could you go out alone? You should be moving with everyone. Smelly old man, what do you know? Mema Song rolled her eyes at Papa Song. Little Han is already a famous swordsman and the master of our Yuzhang City's sword pavilion. This means that our little Han is one of the best in Yuzhang City. What's the big deal about going back and forth by himself? Perhaps he can even bring us to Yangjing City to take a look. All right. If I bring you there, who knows how much trouble you'll cause for little Han? Papa Song sneered. Then, he looked at Guhan and said, Little Han, you didn't rush here just to take a look at us, right? Why did you come looking for us? Papa Song. How is Toad now? Is he any better? Guhan worriedly looked at Song Hammer's room. How else could he be? He's still the same as the day you came to see him. No matter what I say, he still refuses to eat and wants to starve himself to death. Little Han, you came at the right time. Quickly help me persuade Toad. Our whole family is suffering because of him. It's better not to be a swordsman anymore. Our lives won't be as good as before, Papa Song said in a sorrowful tone. After the trial ended, Guhan came to Song Hammer's house many times. At first, Song Hammer didn't even want to see Guhan. Later, he couldn't stand it anymore and Guhan barged into his room. Only after Song Hammer tried everything he could to convince him to eat 1 or 2 meals, but those were the only 2 meals that Song Hammer ate. After Guhan left Yangjing City, Song Hammer once again went on a hunger strike. Even now, he still had to rely on the doctor to forcefully inject him with nutrients to save his life. It's all right. Actually, I came this time because of Toad. Toad's heart disease needs medicine to be cured. This time, I brought the medicine with me. After saying this much, Guhan pulled someone in from the door. It was the unconscious Zhao Hao. Little Han, who is this? Papa Song was startled and asked in fear. This is the medicine I was talking about. Guhan replied with a smile. However, this made Papa Song even more afraid. Little Han, have you been bewitched? This is a human, how can it be used as medicine? You must have practiced too much and become muddle-headed. Papa Song's words almost made Guhan vomit blood. What era was this? How could there be such a thing as using a human as medicine? I'm saying that this person has a way to cure Toad's heart disease. Guhan's sword chi touched Zhao Hao's acupoint, and the unconscious Zhao Hao slowly woke up. Is this person a psychiatrist? Papa Song asked out of curiosity. What psychiatrist? I'm a master sword forging master. After hearing Papa Song's words, the drowsy Zhao Hao immediately stood up and refuted. In this life, he hated doctors the most. He absolutely couldn't be confused with doctors. Master sword forging master? How can he cure Toad's heart disease? Papa Song was even more confused. Papa Song. Toad is on a hunger strike because the cloud-cast iron is broken. If the cloud-cast iron can be repaired, the Toad will definitely return to normal. Papa Song suddenly realized that Jiu Han was planning to cure Song Hammer's heart disease from the root. Papa Song, let's not talk anymore. I'll immediately bring Grandmaster Tianri to look for Toad. After saying this much, Gu Han pulled the confused Jiao Hao to the door of Song Hammer's room. After pushing the door, he discovered that it was still locked. I'll go get the key. Just as Papa Song was about to get the key to Song Hammer's room, Gu Han inserted his sword chi into the keyhole, and the lock opened. It was even more convenient than using the key. Thank the heavens. It's really good that Toad had a childhood friend like Little Cold. After seeing Gu Han anxiously bringing Jiao Hao into Song Hammer's room, Mama Song finally revealed a smile after so many days. What are you talking about? What do you mean childhood friends? How can you use childhood friends to describe a relationship between two men? Papa Song said discontentedly. TSK, what do you know? Childhood friends aren't even as close as our Toad and Little Cold. Why can't I use childhood friends? After entering Song Hammer's room, the originally tall, big, and somewhat fat Song Hammer looked as though he had changed into another person. His body was as thin as a matchstick, and the skin on his face was sticking to his bones. His lips were pale and dry. From the looks of it, his body was in a very bad state. If things continued like this, Song Hammer might die in a few years due to mental and physical exhaustion. At this time, Song Hammer was sitting on a chair. When he saw Gu Han forcefully breaking the door open, he raised his eyelids, and his expression finally changed. He opened his mouth, seemingly wanting to say something. But in the end, Song Hammer still shut his mouth and maintained a deathly silence. The nearby Jiao Hao, who was feeling somewhat awkward, suddenly discovered that the person sitting on the chair was holding a broken sword maiden in his bosom. After studying sword maidens for dozens of years, Jiao Hao immediately recognized that it was an innate sword maiden. Interesting. At this time, Jiao Hao's work instinct surged. He immediately stepped forward, wanting to take a closer look at the broken cloud cast iron in Song Hammer's bosom. What are you trying to do? Nobody is allowed to touch my cloud cast iron. After seeing that Jiao Hao wanted to touch his sword maiden, Song Hammer finally became agitated. He punched Jiao Hao's chest, wanting to push him away. Stop. After seeing this scene, Gu Han used his sword chi to block. However, his target wasn't Jiao Hao, but Song Hammer, who was trying to push Jiao Hao away. With Gu Han's help, Jiao Hao smoothly grabbed the broken cloud cast iron. On the other hand, Song Hammer was tightly bound by Gu Han's sword chi, unable to budge. Sour popsicle. What are you trying to do? Let me go. Nobody is allowed to touch my cloud cast iron, Song Hammer shouted crazily. His voice was so loud and painful that even Papa Song and Mama Song, who were outside the living room, could hear him clearly. Mima Song instinctively wanted to rush in to help her son, but she was grabbed by Papa Song, who was behind her. Believe in Little Han. He won't harm the Toad. Papa Song said firmly. Sir Tianri, do you think this cloud cast iron can still be saved? After waiting for a few minutes, Gu Han asked Jiao Hao, who was carefully examining the cloud cast iron. Using traditional methods, it's impossible to save this cloud cast iron unless we find a great master. We can only throw it in the sword burial land and wait for it to recover on its own. After saying this much, Jiao Hao suddenly revealed a complacent smile. But if we use my new method, that might not be the case. I'm at least 70% sure that I can save this cloud cast iron. Chapter 762. What? What did you say? Song Hammer, who had been frantically struggling, suddenly froze. He was not deaf, and naturally heard Jiao Hao's words clearly. I said that I have a 70% chance of saving this cast cloud iron. Jiao Hao repeated his own words. Is what you said true? Hearing Jiao Hao's words, hot tears suddenly flowed down Song Hammer's skinny face. The tears uncontrollably flowed down his face like a waterfall. Sour popsicle. Let go of me. Let go of me. Don't worry, I'm not going to do anything to this master. I'm going to kneel before this master. Let go of me, Song Hammer said emotionally. Thus, Gu Han loosened the sword chi binding Song Hammer's body. Song Hammer knelt in front of Jiao Hao and kowtowed as if his life depended on it, Master. If you can save this cast cloud iron, I, Song Hammer, will never forget your great kindness. Well said, well said. Zhao Hao helped Song Hammer up. Since you're Lord Guhan's friend, you're my friend as well. Moreover, this is my job to begin with. Helping you repair this sword, Maiden, is not a problem. Thank you, Master. Song Hammer's tears flowed even more quickly. These were tears of joy and excitement. It's fine, it's fine. Zhao Hao smiled. However, you might have to wait for a few more months. I first need to carefully study the cast cloud iron's material, then create a material that is exactly the same as the cast cloud iron itself. Only then can I start repairing it. This will take at least 3 months, so you'll have to wait patiently. Let alone 3 months, even if it's 3 years or 30 years, I'm willing to wait. Song Hammer was so excited that he could not speak clearly. As long as the cast cloud iron could be revived, he was willing to wait as many days as it took. Although Song Hammer had no objections, 3 months felt like a long time to Guhan. From the looks of it, Zhao Hao was not following the original path of repairing a broken sword. Instead, he planned to use the materials he had concocted to repair the cast cloud iron into 2 sword ladies. This was a completely new method, and no one knew if it would succeed. The Zhongjian sword that he had repaired previously had not been synchronized, so no one knew if it would be successfully repaired. Thus, Guhan did not intend to use the method that Zhao Hao had researched to repair the cast cloud iron. Grandmaster Tianri, 3 months is too long. Do you have any other way to quickly repair the cloud cast iron? Guhan asked. Quickly repair the cloud cast iron. Zhao Hao frowned. The cloud cast iron is different from the Zhongjian sword. This is a giant sword forged from meteoric iron. Meteoric iron comes from space. The composition of iron is very strange, and there are many different trace elements. It will take me at least 3 months to completely analyze the material of the cast cloud iron. I say, Comrade Jiyu Han, there are some things that should not be rushed. You can't drink hot soybean milk if you are impatient. That's right, sour popsicle. 3 months is already good enough. There's no need to bring it forward. I have the patience to wait, Song Hammer said. Then let me ask you this. Grandmaster Tianri, can you use the old method to repair this cloudcast iron? Guhan asked. I can't. Zhao Hao's face turned red. If I could do it, I wouldn't be Grandmaster Tianri. I would be Grandmaster Tianri. Then let me ask again. If I use the furnace of heaven and earth, can I repair this cloudcast iron? Guhan asked again. What? What did you say? Tell me what you said about that furnace again. Zhao Hao suddenly grabbed Jiyu Han's hand and asked in a very excited and hurried manner. I'm talking about the furnace of heaven and earth. If I use the furnace of heaven and earth, can I use the old method to repair this cloudcast iron? Guhan repeated. The furnace of heaven and earth. You actually know about the furnace of heaven and earth. Grandmaster Tianri muttered to himself. If I use the furnace of heaven and earth, it might really be possible. But the furnace of heaven and earth hasn't been activated for hundreds of years. It needs a lot of sovereign blood. Guhan took the initiative to speak for Zhao Hao. Don't worry about the sovereign blood. I've already obtained enough sovereign blood to activate the furnace of heaven and earth. Who are you? Who are you? Even if Lord Liu Lei was here, he might not be able to gather enough sovereign blood to activate the furnace of heaven and earth. It's not just Lord Liu Lei. In this world, perhaps only the Liu Nian family has such a reserve. Who are you? How can you gather so much sovereign blood? Zhao Hao's expression was like that of a frightened child. You don't need to know who I am. All you need to know is that I have so much sovereign blood. You just need to answer me. Can you or can you not? Can you use the furnace of heaven and earth to repair the cloudcast iron? Guhan pressed. Yes. Absolutely. Zhao Hao's eyes instantly lit up. The furnace of heaven and earth is the greatest power in the world. Let alone a mere ancient sword lady, it's said that even if a sovereign sword lady is broken, it can be repaired in the furnace of heaven and earth. It's said that a sovereign sword lady like that was repaired in the furnace of heaven and earth. However, I don't know which sovereign sword lady it was. Then there's nothing more to say. Stinky toad, pack up. We'll leave now. Guhan turned and said to Song Hammer. Where are we going? Where are you taking me? Song Hammer was in a state of confusion. He had no idea what Guhan was talking about, nor did he know what the furnace of heaven and earth was, nor did he know where Guhan was taking him. You don't need to worry about that. Just follow me. Do you think I'd harm you? After Guhan spoke, Song Hammer instantly lost his temper. He jumped up from his original position and started to pack his things. This. Zhao Hao suddenly moved closer to Guhan, a flattering expression on his face. Guhan, are you going to activate the furnace of heaven and earth now? That's right. Guhan nodded. Then can you bring me along? Zhao Hao's expression became even more flattering. To a sword-forging grandmaster, the furnace of heaven and earth was an irresistible temptation. To be able to personally see the furnace of heaven and earth forge a treasured sword, even if Zhao Hao died, it would be worth it. Actually, it's not that easy to activate the furnace of heaven and earth. It requires a lot of professional skills, let alone something as important as repairing the cloud-cast iron. Master Guhan, please believe me. Bringing me along will definitely not go wrong, Zhao Hao said excitedly and started to sell himself. All right then, Guhan nodded. In fact, Guhan had originally planned to bring Zhao Hao along. After all, Guhan did not have any experience in repairing the sword mistress in the furnace of heaven and earth. If something went wrong, he would not even know how to fix it. Therefore, if possible, Guhan wanted to bring a sword-forging grandmaster along. Zhao Hao had volunteered himself. Who else could Guhan bring if not him? Mom, I need to go out with Sour Popsicle. I'll be gone for about 4 to 5 days. Don't worry about me. Right, hurry up and prepare some food for me. I'm starving to death. The worried Papa Song and Mama Song were looking at the door and guessing what was happening inside. They were guessing whether or not that sword-forging master would be able to cure Song Hammer's illness. At the very least, Song Hammer should be able to eat something first. However, they did not expect that the doctor would be so effective. Song Hammer, who hadn't left his room for more than 10 days, suddenly jumped out on his own. Moreover, he was in high spirits. He even said that he was starving to death and wanted to eat. This made Papa Song and Mama Song very happy. The food that they had just heated up was quickly brought out. Song Hammer immediately started to wolf down the food. Good. Very good. That stinky toad finally. Seeing her son wolf down the food, Mama Song couldn't help but cry tears of joy. Sparkling and translucent tears flowed out of her eyes. That's a good thing. Why are you crying? Papa Song's eyes also became moist. What are you doing here? Quickly take out the fat goose from the fridge. This toad loves to eat braised goose. Oh. I'll go right away. Mama Song immediately went to the kitchen to take out a fat goose. However, she was stopped by Guhan, who was just about to leave the room. Mama Song, you don't need to cook anymore. The toad and I are about to leave, and we don't have enough time. Leave? Where are you going? Mama Song asked, puzzled. The toad's illness has just been cured. He needs to rest at home for a few days before leaving. The toad's illness can only be cured after leaving this room. Trust me, I won't harm the toad, Guhan said sincerely. But Mima Song wanted to say something, but was stopped by Papa Song. Just listen to Little Han. Little Han won't harm the toad. The toad has been staying at home for a long time. It's time for it to see the sunlight outside. Last night, around 8 or 9 p.m., Guhan brought fleeting time Lena back to Yuzhong City through the small door. But this morning, at 8 or 9 o'clock, before 12 hours had passed, Ji Yuhan had left Yuzhong City through this small door again. This time, however, there were 2 more people with Guhan. One of them was Zhao Hao, who had an excited expression on his face, and the other was Song Hammer, who had no idea what to do. When Ji Yuhan brought Zhao Hao and Song Hammer to board his flying droplet car, the 2 of them were once again thoroughly shocked. Song Hammer's shock was simply because of the cool features of the flying droplet car. It was like a person in the early 90s who suddenly saw an iPhone 7 Plus while holding a mobile phone. On the other hand, Zhao Hao's shock was not as simple as that. As a blacksmith, He was also a scientist. Zhao Hao was even more aware of the technological significance behind the flying car than Gu Han. Therefore, Gu Han's image in Zhao Hao's heart became more and more mysterious. Chapter 763. The Furnace of Heaven and Earth was about 300 kilometers away from Yuzhang City. Although they encountered a few yuan coups along the way, they still arrived at the mysterious, naturally formed Furnace of Heaven and Earth smoothly. This was the first time Gu Han had seen the Furnace of Heaven and Earth in the real world. It was exactly the same as the Furnace of Heaven and Earth in the Instance Dungeon. This Furnace of Heaven and Earth was an extremely large basin. The basin was filled with sand and stones, and there was not a single tree or blade of grass in sight. There was no life in the basin at all. However, the Furnace of Heaven and Earth was surrounded by lush trees and vegetation. There were even wild animals scurrying about in the forest. It was a completely different scene from the desert-like Furnace of Heaven and Earth. The moment they arrived at the Furnace of Heaven and Earth, Gu Han really wanted to immediately start King Yu's rebirth forging. Unfortunately, this could not be done immediately because there was another thing in the Furnace of Heaven and Earth. More accurately speaking, it was not a thing, but a yuan coup covered in flames. This yuan coup silently sat at the center of the Furnace of Heaven and Earth. He closed his eyes and meditated like a monk, as if he was comprehending the mysteries of the Furnace of Heaven and Earth. This yuan coup's position was very awkward. It happened to be at the center of the Furnace of Heaven and Earth, where Gu Han was going to pour in the sovereign blood to restart the Furnace of Heaven and Earth. Then, he would place the broken sword so that King Yu and the cloud-cast iron could repair it. This way, Gu Han would have to kill this yuan coup, or else he would not be able to repair it. In fact, even if this yuan coup was not there, Gu Han would still kill this yuan coup. This was the fate of the sword-bearer and yuan coup. Why is that person's body on fire? Could it be that there is fuel stored in his body? Song Hammer asked in puzzlement when he saw the flaming man. I told you to pay attention in class, or else you wouldn't not know the famous yuan coup, Flame of Vengeance brand. Gu Han rolled his eyes at Song Hammer. What? This person is the Flame of Vengeance brand. Song Hammer was shocked. Her finger was trembling slightly as she pointed at Brand. This was because Brand's reputation was too great, and the sins he had committed were too great for humans. Yuan Ku's name, Vengeful Spirit Brand. Level, Meteor 2-dimensional world, Digital World Yuan Ku faction, League of Legends. HP, 5 stars. Attack, 8 stars agility, 5 stars magic power, 8 stars ability. Brand's body is burning with flames. His only ability is to control these flames to avenge him. He could make the ground burn with a pillar of fire that soared into the sky, and he could also make people's bodies turn naturally. He could even shoot out flames that continuously shot between enemies. These were all very powerful offensive abilities. Ultimate move, Raging Flame Pillar, Raging Flame Burning, Raging Flame Storm. Introduction. A demonic half-human that exists in a two-dimensional digital game created by humans. They call themselves heroes. Because these people who like to call themselves heroes all came from the same two-dimensional world, they formed one of the top 10 factions in Yuan Ku, the League of Legends. Although Flame Spirit of Vengeance Brand belonged to the League of Legends, he was ostracized by some of the League of Legends members due to his blood feud with the Yodel people in the League of Legends. He preferred to be alone and rarely had friends or helpers by his side. If you discover Brand, the Flame of Vengeance, please seriously evaluate your own strength. 4 sword wielders below Immortal Sword tier, unless they were at the pinnacle of Spirit Sword tier and possessed a certain level of fire resistance, they should never engage in battle with Bullet. Otherwise, they would experience the fear of fire. Battle record, Brand is Yuan Ku, who hates humans to the extreme. Once he finds a human, he will attack without hesitation. Since his appearance 300 years ago, there have been 721 recorded battles. Among them, 320 were against ancient sword greatsword wielders, 261 against treasured sword greatsword wielders, 145 against famed sword greatsword wielders, 70 against spiritual sword greatsword wielders, and 21 against immortal sword greatsword wielders. Battle results: Ancient Sword Grade Sword Wielder successfully escaped 123 times, Treasured Sword Grade Sword Wielder escaped 132 times, Famed Sword Grade Sword Wielder escaped 104 times, Spiritual Sword Grade Sword Wielder won 23 times, lost 45 times, Immortal Sword Grade Sword Wielder won 20 times, lost 1 time, and died. Battle suggestion: if you encounter Brand, please escape immediately if you are below Spiritual Sword Grade. Brand's pursuit ability is not strong. Even if you are an Ancient Sword Grade Sword Wielder, as long as you find a way to escape into the river, you will be able to preserve your own life. Also, please do not try to start a group battle with Brand. Brand's Raging Flamestorm has a terrifying effect in group battles. The more people there are, the more powerful it will be. It is better to fight it alone. Song Hammer looked at the information on Brand on his personal terminal again and couldn't help but click his tongue. From this information, it could be seen that this Brand had a terrifying ability to crush sword wielders below Spiritual Sword Grade. His fatality rate was actually more than 60%. Moreover, when facing Spiritual Sword Grade sword wielders of the same level, Brand was still able to maintain a 70% winning rate. He had even killed 2 Spiritual Sword Grade sword wielders, which showed how terrifying his strength was. This was only the information recorded on his personal terminal. What left the deepest impression on Song Hammer was the battle on Mount Zhongqiao more than 100 years ago. On that day, a team of more than 20 famed swordbearers had encountered Brand, the Flame of Vengeance. This team of sword wielders had an extremely powerful sword formation. With this formation, they could even fight with U-grade Yuan Ku for more than 10 minutes and escape unscathed. This team of sword wielders became famous and became influential figures at that time. However, it was this team of sword wielders that could fight with U-grade Yuan Ku, but when they faced Brand, they encountered the biggest disaster since the formation of the team. Among the 25 famed sword grade sword wielders, only 8 people escaped from Mount Zhongqiao. The other 17 people stayed there forever. Out of the 8 people who had been rescued, 6 of them had been afflicted with a phobia of fire. Once they saw fire, they would be as terrified as a mouse seeing a cat. They would cower in a corner and wail. These 6 famed sword-rank swordbearers were completely crippled. Among the 8 people, the other 2 people survived and became active on the battlefield again. Later, one of them became an immortal sword-grade sword wielder. As soon as he became an immortal sword-grade sword wielder, he carried his immortal sword-grade sword mistress and searched the world for traces of Brand. He swore to kill Brand to avenge his brother. In the end, this immortal sword-grade sword wielder encountered Brand 6 times. Although he fought with all his strength each time and defeated Brand each time, Brand still escaped. When this immortal sword-grade sword wielder died, he muttered to his descendants to find a way to kill Brand and eliminate this scourge for humanity. Unfortunately, this immortal sword-grade sword wielder's descendants did not live up to expectations. Since then, they disappeared in the river of history. There was no news of them ever again. Because of this immortal sword-grade sword wielder's persistent pursuit, Brand was also heavily injured. Especially in the last battle with Brand, it was said that Brand was so miserable that only his eyes could not withstand the flames. The flames on the other parts of his body were all extinguished. If it was not for the strength of Demacia, Garin, and the Radiant Maiden, Larks, siblings from the League of Legends, who arrived in time, Brand would have died in the hands of this immortal sword-grade sword wielder. Although Bullet had luckily escaped with his life, it was said that Bullet was on his last breath. He had disappeared for almost 100 years and had never appeared in front of humans again. Who would have thought that he was actually hiding in the furnace of heaven and earth? However, on second thought, otherwise, it was reasonable that he would hide in the furnace of heaven and earth. This was because the furnace of heaven and earth was the place in the whole world where the flames of heaven and earth were the most vigorous. For Yuan Ku, which was made of pure fire elements like Brand, the place with the most vigorous flames was the best place for him to be injured. Therefore, the furnace of heaven and earth became the best place for him to heal his injuries. Guhan. Let's retreat a little and then report Brand's situation to Yuzhang City. Ask Yuzhang City to send a spirit sword-grade sword wielder to deal with Brand. We can just watch the show from the side. Song Hammer said to retreat a little, but in fact, he was advising Guhan to escape. According to the advice given to Song Hammer on his personal terminal, the best method at this time was indeed to escape. If you encounter Flame of Vengeance brand, please escape immediately if you are below Spirit Sword grade. These were the original words on his personal terminal. It was an order given by the Sword Committee to the sword wielder. Song Hammer naturally had a clear conscience in escaping. Song Hammer could escape, but Guhan could not. This was the furnace of heaven and earth. If Brand stayed here to heal, what would happen to Guhan? If Brand stayed here for another 100 years, would Guhan have to wait for him for another 100 years? Of course, Guhan could also call for support from Yuzhang City. If 2 or 3 Spirit Sword grade sword bearers came, they would be able to drive Brand out. But in this way, Guhan's purpose would also be exposed. The furnace of heaven and earth would have to become the focus of the whole Yuzhang City, and Guhan's behavior would also be exposed to everyone. More importantly, after the big attack, Guhan had never really fought with Yuan Ku again. Guhan now wanted to know, after having 2 times more sword elements than at that time, after using the most powerful famous sword, the Juzi sword of Sword Maiden, and after roughly mastering the chaos swordsmanship that he created, how far had Guhan's strength grown? Before this, Guhan could defeat the nether-grade Yuan Ku Archer Sage when he fought with all his strength. However, the Archer Sage was not a strong opponent among the nether-grade Yuan Ku. Ordinary Spirit Sword grade sword-bearers could also defeat the Archer Sage. And at this time, Brand, who stayed in the furnace of heaven and earth, was indeed a very difficult opponent among the Meteor grade Yuan Ku. In the Yuan Ku list published by Humans, Brand was also ranked in the top 50 among the Meteor grade Yuan Ku. If Guhan could defeat such an opponent, then under the U grade, there would be no Yuan Ku that could defeat Guhan. This was a battle that even Guhan himself was not sure of the outcome. Chapter 764. Who dares to disturb the slumber of the flame? When Guhan approached Brand with the Juzi sword, Brand, who had been closing his eyes, suddenly opened them. Obviously, he had sensed Guhan's arrival. Yuzhang City's sword-bearer Guhan greets Senior Brand. Although this was an opponent he had to kill, Guhan still maintained basic respect for Brand. After all, the other party was also a monster who had lived for hundreds of years. In terms of age, he could be considered as Guhan's great-great-great-great-grandfather. Another guy who wants to die. Brand said in a low voice with disdain, "Damn human, the flame gave you a chance to live for a few more days. Tell the flame what time it is now. How many years has the flame been silent?" Every time Brand opened his mouth, the word flame was used to replace the word me. It seemed that Brand no longer treated himself as a human. He already felt that he was a ball of flame. "It's the year 3008, Senior." Guhan replied. "Don't tell me the human's time. I'm not interested in your human's time. You have to tell me the flame's time." Brand roared. Regarding this, Guhan could only express his helplessness. Even if Guhan was the protagonist, it was impossible for him to know the flame's time. "Tell me, how long has it been since the collapse of Zhanjiang College?" Brand seemed to realize that Guhan couldn't know the flame's time, so he asked another question. Guhan was very clear about this question. The original gathering place of League of Legends was on the Alps in northern Europe and was named Zhanjiang College. However, when the Alps battle broke out, facing the fiercest battle between humans and Yuan Ku, League of Legends was unable to resist. Zhanjiang College was also destroyed. Since then, League of Legends had been wandering for a while. It wasn't until the establishment of Demacia that League of Legends regained its foothold. "It has been 370 years. Guhan replied without hesitation. The destruction of Zhanjiang College and the end of the Alps battle happened in the same year. This is a knowledge that every human needs to memorize when they are still in school. So I've been asleep for almost 90 years. Bullet sighed. To think that this fellow had actually stayed in the heaven and earth furnace for 90 years. Were humans fools? They didn't even know that Yuan Ku had stayed in the heaven and earth furnace for 90 years. Human, I've already let you live for 10 more flames. You can die now. After Brand knew the exact time, Guhan was completely useless to him. He casually threw a flame at Guhan, intending to burn him to ashes. Same here. I also think that Senior should go to hell. Guhan swung the juicy sword in his hand as if he was swatting a fly, deflecting the flames thrown by Brand. Human, I hope your strength is as reliable as your mouth. Seeing that Ji Han had deflected his flames with a single strike, Brandt's eyes that were burning with raging flames revealed a cautious look. He had been fighting with humans for almost 200 years. He had a very clear understanding of the strength of humans. To be able to deflect his flames with a single strike, such strength was sufficient for them to fight for hundreds of rounds. Flame Pillar. Bullet didn't underestimate Guhan. At the first moment, he controlled the huge flame force around him. In an instant, the sandy ground under Guhan's feet turned into a mass of magma. Then, a huge flame pillar rose from Guhan's feet into the sky, enveloping Guhan's entire figure in this flame. This flame pillar was so huge, with a radius of about 1 kilometer. Almost half of the heaven and earth furnace was covered by the flame pillar. It looked as if the heaven and earth furnace had been reactivated. Oh my god! This isn't right. Bullet's flame pillar shouldn't have such a large range. Song Hammer's eyeballs were about to fall out of their sockets after witnessing this. According to the information provided by his personal terminal, Bullet's flame pillar should only be a flame pillar with a diameter of about 100 meters. However, this flame pillar had already exceeded 1 kilometer in diameter. It was more than 10 times stronger than Bullet's original ability. Could it be that after 90 years of cultivation, this damn Bullet's ability has advanced? Song Hammer was dumbfounded. However, on second thought, this didn't seem right. Increasing his ability by 10 times was no longer a simple improvement. This was already in the category of advancement. Bullet was no longer the original Meteor rank Yuan Ku. He had reached the standard of the universe rank Yuan Ku. He could be considered as a human immortal sword wielder. No, I have to save Sour Popsicle. After a moment of shock, Song Hammer remembered that Guhan had already been engulfed by the flames. He immediately ignored the fact that he didn't even have a sword Maiden and rushed into the heaven and earth furnace to save Guhan. Stop. You're just going to die if you go. Fleeting Rena grabbed Song Hammer's neck, and the defenseless Song Hammer was unable to move. Before Guhan went looking for trouble with Bullet, he had already instructed Fleeting Rena to ensure Song Hammer's safety. No matter what Song Hammer wanted to do, she had to stop him. Don't worry, your childhood friend won't die so easily. He's a scourge that will last for thousands of years. Fleeting Rena would not let go of any opportunity to insult Guhan. Even Bullet himself had a look of disbelief on his face when he saw the towering flame pillar. Even he couldn't believe that such a huge and terrifying flame pillar was unleashed by his own hands. However, he did not feel any extraordinary increase in his strength. Could it be because of this land? Bullet suddenly thought of the area with an unexpectedly high amount of fire elemental energy. Could it be that his increase in strength had something to do with this? At this moment, the monstrous pillar of flames finally disappeared. Within the flames, a figure slowly became clear again. After experiencing the baptism of the flame pillar, more than half of Guhan's clothes had been destroyed. Apart from his underwear, which was protected by a layer of sword aura, the rest of his clothes had disappeared. Compared to his destroyed clothes, Guhan's body was in good condition. His skin was as smooth as jade, and not a single burn mark could be seen on his body. It was as if he had just taken a bath. Not to mention, Ji Han's body was still very strong. Even if he was not as strong as those professional bodybuilders, the muscles in his body were like the muscles of a beast lurking under his skin. As Ji Han moved, a little towering mountain range was revealed from time to time. When he saw one of the women present, her heart suddenly palpitated. Pervert. Fleeting time Rena let out a little bashfully, and lowered her head, not daring to look at Ji Han's body any longer. What a beautiful body. To think that I had such a perfect body back then. Bullet seemed to be immersed in Guhan's body as well. However, Bullet was immersed in his own past. This flaming man seemed to have spent a good period of time as a human. The Heaven and Earth Furnace's ability to strengthen flames is truly terrifying. I didn't expect it to be 10 times stronger, Guhan lamented as he looked at the scorched area within a kilometer of him. At the same time, Ji Han deeply touched the Juzi sword in his hand. If not for the protection of the Juzi sword, Ji Han would not have been able to get through the pillar of flames so easily. At the very least, he would have lost a layer of skin. It seems that the sword mistress in your hand is very powerful. Bullet looked at the Juzi sword deeply. It was obvious that he had also realized the source of Guhan's terrifying fire resistance. However, a strange smile immediately appeared on Bullet's face. The flames are already burning on your body. You're about to experience the fear of fire. Guhan did not seem to notice that his body was not completely unharmed. There was still a small ball of flame burning on Guhan's hair, indicating that Guhan was already in a state of being ignited. Be careful of the sour popsicle. He's about to use flame brand. What Ji Han didn't realize was discovered by Song Hammer behind him, so Song Hammer immediately shouted to remind Ji Han. Too late. Sleep with the flames. A fireball the size of a bus shot out from Bullet's palm and shot towards Guhan. This was another of Bullet's skills, flame brand. Under normal circumstances, flame brand was not a very powerful skill. At most, it would cause some fire damage to the enemy, and the damage was not even as high as the flame pillar. However, Bullet's skill could ignite his opponent. Once Bullet's opponent was ignited, flame brand could activate the flames that Bullet had left on the opponent, stunning his opponent. Under normal circumstances, the duration of this stun was 10 seconds, but with the effect of flame brand being increased by 10 times, the duration of the stun would be increased to 100 seconds. This was enough for Bullet to kill Guhan 2 or 3 times. Terminus Gendi once said that directional skills were never something to be afraid of. As long as you can dodge them, that's enough. Looking at the fireball flying towards him, Guhan's figure leaned to the left and he easily dodged the fireball. This human's positioning is quite good. My flame brand, which has been magnified by 10 times, actually did not hit him. Bullet's expression suddenly looked like his mother had died. Flame brand had a cooldown period. Before the cooldown period ended, he was afraid that he would not be able to pose any threat to this human who was extremely fast. Chapter 765. Human. Bullet let out an angry roar. During the cooldown of the flame brand, Guhan launched a frenzied attack on Bullet. The Juzi sword constantly stabbed into Bullet's body, and every time the Juzi sword stabbed into him, Bullet could feel the flames in his body weaken a lot, as if this Juzi sword had the ability to absorb flames. The cooldown time of the flame pillar was much faster than the flame brand. During the cooldown time of the flame brand, Bullet had already used the flame pillar twice. This opponent took all the damage from the flame pillar, but just like before, the flame pillar did not pose much of a threat to Guhan. The Juzi sword had an extremely high flame resistance, and the flame pillar, which originally had extremely high damage, could originally lose 20% of the shield energy of an ordinary spirit sword level sword wielder, actually could not wear down 10% of Guhan's shield energy, and this was the flame pillar that had been strengthened by the heaven and earth furnace by 10 times. According to this calculation, the flame provided by the Juzi sword was about 2000%, which was equivalent to 20 times the flame resistance. This was an extremely terrifying figure. This meant that all the flame-type opponents in front of Guhan would be weakened by 20 times. There was no need to fight, and it would be more straightforward to just admit defeat. However, Guhan quickly figured out why the Juzi sword was so awesome. The reason was the material of the Juzi sword. The Juzi sword was a treasure sword made from the trunk of the legendary Fusang tree. And the Fusang tree was the place where the 10 golden crows stopped. The golden crows were the legendary sun. No matter how awesome the flames on Bullet's body were, they could not compare to the flames of the sun. The Juzi sword naturally had an extremely high flame resistance. As a result, Bullet was very embarrassed when facing Guhan. The flames that were originally powerful to other sword holders were now insignificant to Guhan, and the only thing that could turn the situation around, the flame brand, was really difficult to hit Guhan. For example, just now, Bullet waited for his flame brand to cool down, and when Guhan rushed toward him, There was only a distance of less than 10 meters. Brant finally let out a laugh. When he felt that he was absolutely certain that he could hit Guhan, he smashed the flame brand towards Guhan's head. How could Guhan not understand Brand's intentions? In truth, he had charged at Brand in order to give Brand the opportunity to cast Flame Brand. 9 Swords of Mysterious Heaven, Sword Formation Curtain. Guhan unleashed the top-notch movement technique of the 9 Swords of Mysterious Heaven. He was able to evade the Flame Brand in a mere 10 meters. The second time the blazing brand was evaded was a fatal mistake for Brant. Brant was once again left wide open in front of Guhan. 9 Swords of Mysterious Heaven, Sword Battle Dome. A big move that contained 10,000 quark sword elements struck Brand's chest and pierced through it. Brant looked down at the juicy sword that had pierced through his chest. He opened his mouth weakly, and with a bang, his body exploded into sparks. We won. Seeing this scene, Song Hammer, who was watching from afar, finally let out a long sigh of relief. However, on second thought, Song Hammer felt a little unhappy. He and Guhan had both become sword-bearers on the same day. Logically speaking, at that time, Guhan had only met the requirement of 100 quark sword elements, while Song Hammer had 200 quark sword elements. But now, Guhan had become a famed sword-tier swordsman, while Song Hammer was still a pitiful ancient sword-tier swordsman. No matter how I think about it, I still feel unhappy. Song Hammer pursed his lips. Although he knew that Guhan was a little stronger than him, he didn't think that this little bit would be so much. A famed sword-tier swordsman was able to kill a fallen sword-tier swordsman like Guhan. It's all my fault for slacking off for the past few weeks. Once the cloud-cast iron is repaired, I'll definitely grind monsters with it. I can't be left behind by the sour popsicles. Song Hammer was still thinking about his own matters when he suddenly heard Guhan's nervous voice. Stinky Toad, hurry up and scatter. You see, I could vaguely hear the voice. Scatter? Why should I scatter? Song Hammer raised his head in confusion. He saw fleeting time Rena and Zhao Hao frantically running away from Song Hammer, while a ball of flame slowly floated towards him. The ball of flame seemed slow, but in reality, it was incredibly fast. By the time Song Hammer reacted, the ball of flame had already appeared in front of him. Brant had actually escaped to Song Hammer's side. Brant's body had dissipated, but he was not dead. Instead, he hid his soul in the core of his body and flew to Song Hammer's side. Since you are that human's friend, then you shall die in his place. Brant's voice was like that of a dying wolf, but the hatred in his voice could not be concealed. It seemed that Brant had decided to kill Guhan's friend to vent his anger after realizing that he could not kill Guhan. Blaze. Brant only realized that something was wrong after he shouted the 2 words. He began to run away in panic. Storm. Unfortunately, he was too late. Brant had finally unleashed his ultimate skill. A stream of flames flowed out of Brant's body like a stream of water, and it charged towards Song Hammer, who was less than 20 meters away from him. Even at a distance of 20 meters, Song Hammer could still feel the intense heat coming from the opposite side. The hair on his body had already started burning at this moment. In less than a second, the stream of flames would pour into Song Hammer's body like a stream of water. Everyone could imagine the effect of the ultimate skill of a fireman equipped with the 6 god equipment on a level 0, unequipped Chick. There was no doubt that Chick would go back to soak in the spring. Little Yunyun, I don't want to die yet. Chick did not even have the strength to run away. He could only shout the name of Cast Cloud Iron one last time before closing his eyes and waiting for death. At this moment, a young girl suddenly descended from the sky. She held a black wooden sword in her hand and stood in front of Song Hammer. The stream of flames directly collided with the young girl's sword. The young girl frowned, and her body went limp as she knelt on one knee. Fortunately, the injury did not seem to be serious. The stream of flames quickly flowed out of the young girl's body and flowed in another direction. Little Yunyun, are you here to save me? Song Hammer was in a trance. He seemed to see Cast Cloud Iron standing in front of him. I'm not Little Yunyun. I'm Master's Juicy. Juicy said expressionlessly. Just now, Song Hammer was about to be swallowed by Fireman's flaming storm. Guhan could only use all his strength to throw his juicy sword in front of Song Hammer. Then, he let the juicy sword transform in midair and used his juicy sword to block Brand's flaming storm. However, flaming storm was a skill that could continuously bounce and flow in the enemy's body and could not be dodged. The so-called undodgeable meant that even Guhan could not rely on his own body to dodge this skill. When the flaming storm hit the juicy sword with its amazing fire resistance, it did not have any effect. Song Hammer was blocked by juicy and could not be touched. The flaming storm actually turned around and swept towards Guhan, who was rushing over. Master. Seeing this, Juicy immediately wanted to run back to Guhan's side and help Guhan block the flowing flaming storm. Without her in Guhan's hands, with Guhan's body as a sword-class swordsman, it would be impossible for him to block the terrifying damage of the flaming storm. Don't move. Just protect the stinky toad. Faced with Juicy's attempt, Guhan immediately stopped her. It had not been easy to save Song Hammer's life. Guhan would not let Song Hammer take any more risks. Moreover, this was just a ball of fire. He did not believe that he could not withstand the attack of this flame with his remaining strength. Guhan turned around and held the heavenly sword in his hand. Then, he raised the sword to face the flaming storm that was about to rush into his body. Unfortunately, because Juicy was in a liberated state, Guhan could only use the blade of the heavenly sword. He could not use the heavenly sword skills. Otherwise, with the heroic state provided by the heavenly sword, Guhan was confident that he could easily neutralize this ball of fire. Come on. 9 swords of mysterious heaven, sword of the spring. A small umbrella of sword energy appeared at the tip of the heavenly sword. Guhan was ready to receive the first attack from the flaming storm. At this critical moment, a small head suddenly emerged from Guhan's hair. The small head turned around and suddenly discovered the flaming storm flying towards Guhan. An extremely happy smile appeared on the small head's face. The small head struggled to free its wings from Guhan's messy hair. Then, it flapped its wings and flew out of Guhan's hair to receive the flaming storm head-on. One paw. The small elf's hair was red. Therefore, Guhan could immediately tell that it was one of the poor 8-paw elves. This little guy, why is he heading towards that flaming storm out of the blue? Does she want to die? Of course, One Paw was not looking for death. As soon as the fierce ball of fire came close to One Paw's body, One Paw opened its mouth and sucked as if it were milk. The water-like flame was sucked into one's mouth like milk. Burp. One Paw burped and spat out the last bit of flame from its mouth. The shockingly hot flaming storm was completely swallowed by One Paw. After eating the flame, One Paw still did not seem satisfied. It looked at Guhan expectantly, as if asking Guhan if there were any more milk-like flames like this. Aye. When he saw this, his life was completely extinguished. Chapter 766. Damn it, you actually dared to hit my brother. Poor Brand. Even after his death, he didn't feel at ease. Song Hammer still whipped his corpse. It turned out that when Song Hammer saw Brand turn into a flame that was as weak as a candle flame, he was immediately enraged. He picked up his cast cloud iron broken sword and used the remaining blade of the broken sword to stab the candle flame. Even though it was a broken sword, a sword maiden was still a sword maiden. It still had the ability to cause harm to Yuan Ku. Therefore, Brand's last bit of unlucky candle flame was completely extinguished under the attack of the cast cloud iron. Immediately after, a spatial vortex opened up around the candle flame. This meant that Brand was completely dead. It was impossible for him to have faked his death. Hurry up and absorb the sword essence in the dimensional vortex. Song Hammer patted Juicy's shoulder and urged Juicy. Juicy nodded. The hilt of her sword was in her hand, so it was very convenient for her to extend her small hand into the dimensional vortex. However, in less than 2 seconds, Juicy retracted her hand. I didn't open this dimensional vortex. I can't absorb the sword essence inside, Juicy suddenly said to Guhan. Why can't you absorb it? Your master clearly defeated Yuan Ku, Song Hammer said in confusion. I didn't defeat him. You defeated him, stinky toad. Guhan returned to Song Hammer's side and punched him hard on the shoulder. Don't forget how you avenged me just now. Song Hammer only reacted after hearing Guhan's words. It turned out that Yuan Ku had been stabbed to death by his own broken sword. After understanding this, Song Hammer's face instantly turned sour. I don't want to. Sour Popsicle was obviously the one who killed it. I just randomly slapped it a few times at the end. Am I not taking advantage of you? Get lost. That's not the only thing you've taken advantage of. Ji Yuhan kicked Song Hammer and looked at the dimensional vortex that was about to close. Hurry up and put the cast cloud steel hilt in. Although the cast cloud steel is broken, its ability to store sword essences should still be there. If you don't store the sword essences, it'll all be wasted. No. Even if it's a waste, I won't take advantage of you, Song Hammer said firmly. I didn't ask you to take advantage of me. Consider it as me lending it to you. When you kill a meteor Yuan Ku in the future, you will be returning it to me, Guhan said. Song Hammer's frown finally eased. In essence, Song Hammer was not someone who liked to be stubborn. After swearing that he would return the meteor Yuan Ku's dimensional vortex to Guhan, Guhan picked up the cast cloud iron hilt and put it into the dimensional vortex. The Stinky Toad can obtain about 5,000 sword essence from a meteor Yuan Ku. Now, even if the Stinky Toad is half a famed sword wielder, he won't hold a grudge against me because of the huge gap between us, right? Seeing Song Hammer excitedly absorb the meteor Yuan Ku's sword essence, Guhan felt very gratified. Song Hammer was someone that Guhan wanted to be friends with for life. He did not want to part ways with Song Hammer because of some ridiculous reason. This was something that Guhan absolutely did not want to see. After Bran's interlude, the Heaven and Earth Furnace could finally be reactivated. At Zhao Hao's request, before pouring in the sovereign blood, Zhao Hao first scanned the entire Heaven and Earth Furnace. After confirming that there were no abnormalities, he gestured for Guhan to start the Heaven and Earth Furnace. Lord Guhan, don't worry. The Heaven and Earth Furnace is the most mysterious furnace in the world. It has the power to automatically repair all metal objects. As long as the cast cloud iron lady is placed in the Heaven and Earth Furnace, it will automatically repair itself. There is no need for us humans to interfere at all. Zhao Hao once again assured Guhan and Song Hammer that repairing the cast cloud iron was very simple and that there would be no accidents. TSK. However, this is truly extravagant. You used 4,000 cubic centimeters of sovereign blood to repair an ancient sword lady. I say, Lord Guhan, are you the grandson-in-law of the Liunyan family? The Liunyan family treats you too well. Don't ask me how I know it's the Liunyan family that gave you the sovereign blood. Didn't you see the Liunyan family's logo on the box? Hearing Zhao Hao refer to Guhan as the grandson-in-law of the Liunyan family, Fleeting Time Rina looked at Guhan with a complicated expression. She then lowered her head, not wanting anyone to see her expression. It's not that simple. Guhan shook his head, then took out the Zhongjian sword and placed it next to the Juzi sword. This was to allow King Yu's soul to quickly find the Zhongjian sword's body when the Heaven and Earth Furnace's flames were at their strongest, and then enter the Zhongjian sword's body. Lord Guhan, you're holding the wrong one. You're holding the soulless Zhongjian sword, Zhao Hao hurriedly said. If you want to be safe and completely repair the Zhongjian sword lady, then take out the soulless Zhongjian sword lady. You're holding the wrong one. Guhan did not say anything. Instead, he took out the soulless Zhongjian sword and put it down quite a distance away from the Juzi sword. Zhao Hao was right. Only the heavens knew if his method would work. For the sake of the sword lady, it was better to completely repair the Zhongjian sword while the Heaven and Earth Furnace was activated. What about you, Rina? What do you want to repair? Guhan remembered that Fleeting Time Wooden Fish had mentioned that Fleeting Time Rina also needed the Heaven and Earth Furnace, so Guhan asked Fleeting Time Rina. Don't worry about me. It's got nothing to do with you. Fleeting Time Rina rebuked Guhan. Guhan did not say anything else. Now that everything was ready, all that was left was to pour in the sovereign's blood and activate the Heaven and Earth Furnace. Guhan opened the chest filled with sovereign's blood and followed Yi Qing's instructions. He took out 5,000 cubic centimeters of sovereign's blood, which was equivalent to 50 test tubes containing 100 cubic centimeters of Sovereign's blood. He then opened the test tubes and poured the Sovereign's blood, which had been sealed for who knew how long, into the heaven and earth furnace. As the last bottle of Sovereign blood was poured into the furnace, just like what had happened in the Instance dungeon, the heaven and earth furnace started to metallize, revealing its gold-like body. Beautiful. So beautiful. Mother Nature is indeed the greatest forger of swords. Only Mother Nature could create such a great furnace of heaven and earth. Seeing that, Zhao Hao became like a devout believer. He knelt on the metal body of the heaven and earth furnace and kept uttering pious praises. "It's time to go," Gu Han said to Song Hammer as he looked at the furnace of heaven and earth and estimated the time it would take for the lid to appear. He had already told Song Hammer about the lid, and Song Hammer did not dare to delay. She immediately pulled Zhao Hao, who was still praising the furnace of heaven and earth, and ran out of the furnace of heaven and earth. Ji Han's expression changed when he noticed that Fleeting Time Rena was still standing in her original position. "Miss Rena, please leave this place." However, Fleeting Time Rena ignored Ji Han's words, and did not respond to him at all. For the sake of the Sovereign's blood, Gu Han sighed. He suddenly turned around and ran back to the center of the furnace of heaven and earth. He grabbed Fleeting Time Rena by the waist and pulled her into his embrace as he ran out of the furnace of heaven and earth. Fortunately, Gu Han reacted in time. By the time he left the furnace of heaven and earth with Fleeting Time Rena, a transparent lid had already appeared on the furnace of heaven and earth. Who do you think is better, humans or Yuan Ku? Is there really that much of a difference between a human and a Yuan Ku? Fleeting Time Rena, who was in Gu Han's embrace, blurted out the question. What kind of question is that? There's nothing to compare a human to a Yuan Ku. Yuan Ku deserves to die. Gu Han replied indifferently. Is that so? I understand now. Fleeting Time Rena's voice was filled with sorrow. Fleeting Time Rena, who was in Gu Han's embrace, suddenly felt as if she had turned into a gust of wind as she floated out of Gu Han's embrace. Upon seeing this, Gu Han suddenly recalled how Fleeting Time Rena had fought Qingpin in the Mailing mountain range when she was still Rena Takasaka. "You're the one who gave me the answer." Just as the furnace lid was about to completely cover the heaven and earth furnace, Fleeting Rena leaped into the gap between the furnace lid and the furnace lid. Gu Han instinctively wanted to rush down to save Fleeting Time Rena, but when he saw that the heaven and earth furnace's lid was about to close in less than 0.2 seconds, he stopped in his tracks and watched as Fleeting Time Rena jumped into the center of the heaven and earth furnace. "You jumped down on your own. It has nothing to do with me." Gu Han silently selected the video recording function on his personal terminal and saved the video of Fleeting Time Rena's actions. This way, when the Fleeting family came to cause trouble for Gu Han would have an excuse to defend himself. Of course, he felt that the video recording would not be useful in the end. The Fleeting family should have predicted Fleeting Time Rena's actions, and their intention was to lure Fleeting Time Rena into the heaven and earth furnace. Although the inside of the heaven and earth furnace was covered by the scarlet flames, Ji Han, who was standing outside, could not feel the heat at all. All the heat was blocked by the lid of the heaven and earth furnace. However, this did not mean that Gu Han was blind. He did not know what was going on inside the heaven and earth furnace. This was because Gu Han still maintained his connection with the Juzi sword in the heaven and earth furnace. He understood the changes in the heaven and earth furnace through the Juzi sword. Fleeting Rena's corpse has completely disappeared. She did not turn into ashes. A dimensional whirlpool appeared and sucked Fleeting Rena's corpse into it. Juzi sword's words confirmed Ji Han's suspicions. Fleeting Rena was indeed Yuan Hu. This also explained her question to Gu Han. Are humans or Yuan Ku better? Are there really so many differences between Yuan Ku and humans? Fleeting Time Rena asked such a strange question because she knew that he was Yuan Ku. Fleeting Time Rena knew that she was about to die, and the Fleeting family would never accept the existence of a Yuan Ku in their family. Gu Han could imagine that something must have happened between Fleeting Time Rena's father and a female Yuan Ku, resulting in the birth of Fleeting Time Rena. This was a story that could be written into a melodramatic romance novel with hundreds of thousands of words. But the problem was, If the Fleeting Time family really didn't want Fleeting Lena to exist in this world, why didn't they kill her the moment she was born? Why did she have to go all the way to the furnace of heaven and earth to commit suicide? Guhan quickly found the answer to this question. Chapter 767. In truth, Guhan had seen Fleeting Rena turn to ash with his own eyes. This was because Guhan was using the Juzi sword's perspective. As the flames burned, Ji Han saw Reina Takasaka's originally beautiful body rapidly turn into charcoal. Her beautiful face also withered in an instant, turning into a terrifying pile of coal. Fleeting Rena's body was like a black dandelion. Her body was blown away by the strong wind caused by the flames, and the black ash was quickly blown away. Her skin was peeled off layer by layer, followed by the fat and organs beneath her skin, and finally, her bones. Everything disappeared without a trace. It was a pity that Guhan did not see Fleeting Rena's expression at that time. He did not know how she felt when she faced the flames that buried her. Following that, a dimensional vortex appeared, sucking in all the dust that had been scattered in all directions into the vortex in his body. After seeing Fleeting Rena completely incinerated by the flames, Guhan no longer had any interest in using the Juzi sword's perspective to observe the situation inside the heaven and earth furnace. He listened to Juzi report the latest information to Guhan. Master, the Zhongdian sword has turned pure white. Back in the Instance dungeon, Yi Qing and Ji Han had experienced the flames together. Thus, Ji Han knew that the moment the forged sword mistress turned pure white, it meant that the most appropriate time to forge the sword mistress had arrived. Quick! King Yu, hurry up and enter the Zhongdian sword's body. Ji Han immediately ordered King Yu, but what made Ji Han's heart clench was that King Yu didn't respond to Ji Han's request. Instead, he maintained a painful silence. Juzi, has King Yu entered the Zhongdian sword? Guhan had no choice but to ask Juzi. Master, Sister King Yu did not move. Her soul is still in Juzi's body, Juzi replied to Guhan. Juzi replied to the Ji Han. This was the worst kind of Ji Han. It meant that the King of Yu had relapsed at such a crucial moment. After leaving Yuzhang, Guhan communicated with King Yu, who had quietened down. After Guhan's persuasion, King Yu finally agreed to Guhan's request. However, Guhan could sense that King Yu was not very enthusiastic about his request. There was a possibility that she would change her mind at any time. As expected, at the crucial moment that decided King Yu's fate, King Yu changed her mind. Her aversion towards the Zhongdian sword made her unwilling to become an ancient swordplay. King Yu, listen to me. Guhan tried his best to persuade King Yu again. This time, Guhan said a lot, but King Yu remained silent. Finally, Guhan was infuriated by King Yu. King Yu, now is not the time for you to throw a tantrum. My patience with you is at its limit. If you don't go out, I'll. Before Guhan could finish, he heard Juzi say in pleasant surprise to Guhan, Master, Sister King Yu's soul has gone out. When Guhan heard this, he immediately shared Juzi's vision. At this moment, the heaven and earth furnace's temperature had already exceeded 1,000,000 degrees Celsius. This was a temperature that human technology could not produce on a large scale. At most, humans could only produce this temperature in a small laboratory. In order to maintain this temperature in such a large space, they would need to continuously explode 10 atomic bombs. Under this kind of temperature, everything began to distort. Some scenes that couldn't normally be seen appeared in front of Ji Han's eyes. Souls. Normally, he would never be able to see a soul, but at this moment, it appeared right in front of Ji Han. King Yu. Guhan looked at King Yu's figure floating in the air. Guhan knew that this was King Yu's soul. She had already left Juzi's body. But King Yu seemed to be hesitating. She was already standing next to Zhongdian. As long as she drilled down, she would be able to enter Zhongdian's body and complete her rebirth. But at this time, King Chu was still hesitating. Am I going to go from a famed sword maiden to a pitiful ancient sword maiden? A useless ancient sword maiden that everyone looks down on? King Yu thought to herself. She could feel the temperature around her that was over 1,000,000 degrees. The more she thought about it, the more unwilling she became. She did not want to accept this result, but whether it was the cold or the surroundings, they were forcing her to accept this result. If a human was here, they would have been vaporized by the high temperature, just like fleeting time Rina. Because King Yu appeared in the form of a soul, she could still maintain her existence in such a high temperature. However, she could not stay like this for long. The temperature was still rising, and King Yu could clearly feel her soul being damaged. Her soul source was also weakening. In just a few seconds, she felt as if she had turned from an 18-year-old girl to a 58-year-old auntie. In just a few more seconds, even if she was just a soul, she would dissipate in the flames. As she had left Ju's body, King Yu could not hear what Guhan was saying to her. However, she knew that Guhan was about to go crazy from impatience. Consider it as me owing you in this lifetime. King Yu let out a long sigh. She finally had to accept her fate and become the new Zhongdian sword. She had no choice, as she had no way out. Either she became the Zhongdian sword, or she would die here and never meet Guhan again. In comparison, King Yu could only choose the first option. However, just as King Yu was about to give in, something unexpected happened. A ghost-like figure suddenly flashed in front of King Yu, and King Yu watched as the ghost charged into the Zhongdian sword's body. Following this, the Zhongdian sword exploded with light. This light was so dazzling that even her soul felt like her eyes could not take it anymore. Compared to his eyes, King Yu's heart was even more unbearable. Based on her previous experience, King Yu knew that once a soulless sword lady released such a light, it meant that the sword lady had regained her soul. The sword lady had been revived. The Zhongdian sword had been revived, but King Yu's soul was still standing beside it. King Yu knew better than anyone what this meant. Mother ****. King Yu let out a miserable shriek. Then, her soul could not endure the flames of the heaven and earth furnace and started to crumble bit by bit. Save me. I want to be with Guhan forever. At the last moment of her life, King Yu exploded with a powerful will to live. The last piece of her soul started to fly towards the Juzi sword behind her. Finally, before her soul completely dissipated, King Yu successfully returned to Juzi's body. King Yu. King Yu. Outside the heaven and earth furnace, Guhan, who was sharing Juzi's vision, had lost control of her emotions. She anxiously and painfully called out King Yu's name. Master. Sister, King Yu's soul is in great danger. She's on the verge of collapse. Even with the protection of my body, Sister King Yu's soul will disappear in a few minutes. Juzi calmly reported to Guhan. Calm down, calm down. Guhan, who had lost control of his emotions, once again displayed his astonishing control over his rationality. In just a few seconds, Guhan successfully stabilized his collapsing emotions through self-suggestion and recovered most of his rationality. Rina Takasaka, you tricked me again. This was the first thing that popped up in Guhan's mind after he recovered his rationality. Perhaps Juzi and King Yu didn't know who had entered the Sword of Destiny before King Yu did. However, Ji Yu had managed to catch a glimpse of this soul at the last moment. This soul was none other than Rina Takasaka, whose body had completely dissipated and been sucked back by the dimensional vortex. No one expected that Rina Takasaka's soul wouldn't be sucked into the dimensional vortex despite the dimensional vortex appearing. Instead, it remained in the heaven and earth furnace, waiting for the opportunity to snatch the Zhongdian sword's body. This was the second time Rina Takasaka had tricked Guhan. The last time, Rina Takasaka had almost made Guhan lose Qingpin. This time, she had made King Yu stand on the edge of a cliff of life and death. In a few more minutes, this cliff would completely collapse, and then there would be no more. Forget it. I don't have time to care about this woman now. I have to think of a way to preserve King Yu's soul. Guhan's mind began to turn rapidly. At that moment, the greatest danger King Yu faced was the problem of her soul. Her soul had been severely injured in the heaven and earth furnace. More than 95% of her soul had already dissipated, and the remaining 5% would completely disappear in a few minutes. This was an irreversible process. If a person lost their limbs and lost 50% of their body, they still had a chance of survival. However, If a person only had half of their brain left and the rest of their body was gone, they definitely wouldn't be able to survive. This was the situation King Yu was facing. He had to think of a way to restore King Yu's soul to the minimum strength that could maintain her existence. Otherwise, she would die without a doubt. Soul solution. That's right, I want soul solution. At this thought, Guhan immediately realized that the only thing that could save King Yu was soul solution. Only soul solution could quickly restore King Yu's soul to the strength that could maintain her existence. There was no other way. Chapter 768. Grandmaster Tianri, Soul Solution. Hurry up and give me the soul solution. Guhan immediately turned to Zhao Hao. Early this morning, Guhan had given the only bottle of soul solution he had to Zhao Hao to repair Zhongdian's soul. Guhan only hoped that Zhao Hao hadn't used up the entire bottle of soul solution. Soul solution? Are you talking about the bottle you gave me this morning? Zhao Hao's reaction was quick. That's right. Repairing Zhongdian's lady sword doesn't require an entire bottle of soul solution. You should still have half a bottle left. Guhan's eyes were filled with anticipation. He only hoped that Zhao Hao would tell him that he indeed had half a bottle of soul solution left. What half a bottle? It would be absurd if I had half a bottle. Zhao Hao mumbled, then took out a small bottle from his pocket and threw it in front of Guhan. With Guhan's reflexes, he only needed one finger to catch the bottle. However, Guhan nervously stretched out his hands to protect the bottle. Through the transparent glass, the light green solution could be seen clearly. That's right, this was soul solution. That's right, this was the highest quality soul solution. The bottle of soul solution had been opened, but not much of it had been used. About 4/5 of it was left in the bottle. It seemed like Grandmaster Tianri's abilities weren't just for show. He only used 1/5 of the soul solution to repair Zhongdian's soul. The efficiency was astonishing. Guhan looked at Grandmaster Tianri gratefully. If there was only half a bottle of soul solution left, it might not be enough to repair Zhongdian's soul to the point where it could maintain its existence. Now that there was still 4/5 of the soul solution left, it was foolproof. As long as Guhan poured this bottle of soul solution on Ju's sword, it could nourish Zhongdian's soul through Ju's sword and maintain Zhongdian's soul to the point where it could maintain its existence. The problem of the soul solution was solved, but there was an even bigger problem in front of Guhan, and that was how Guhan should pour this bottle of soul solution on the Juzi sword. At that moment, the furnace of heaven and earth had been completely covered by his lid. This lid, which even Jendi could not forcibly open, became the biggest tiger in front of Guhan. Guhan could only open this lid or drill a small hole in it to send the soul solution to the Juzi sword. But how was he going to open this extremely sturdy lid? Without thinking for too long, Guhan almost immediately took out a golden sword maiden from his dimensional pocket and gathered all the sword essence in his body into the sword maiden's body. Zhao Hao suddenly realized that Jiyu Han had strangely stopped his body. He was holding a golden sword in his hand, and he was in a somewhat Chunibya posture. Then, he just stood there, motionless. Young people are a bit Chunibya. Zhao Hao chuckled, then glanced at the golden sword mistress from the corner of his eye. Immediately, his entire body froze, as if he was frozen solid. What's going on? My eyes aren't playing tricks on me, right? This is impossible. Zhao Hao could not believe his eyes. He actually felt that the sword maiden in Guhan's hand looked like an empress sword maiden. How was this possible? How could Guhan, a famed sword wielder, have an empress sword maiden? Although this was what he thought, Zhao Hao could not suppress his curiosity at all. He quickly ran to Guhan's side and squatted at Guhan's feet. He did not mind if his actions were a bit inelegant and began to observe the golden sword maiden with full attention. There's no mistake. There's no mistake. This is the legendary Shenyuan sword. After 3 minutes of observation, Zhao Hao finally covered his mouth and came to this conclusion. The golden sword maiden in Guhan's hand was 90% sure that it was the legendary Shenyuan sword. One should never underestimate the judgment of a Grandmaster swordsman. If it was not for the fact that it was too unbelievable, Grandmaster Tianri could be 100% sure that this was the Shenyuan sword. Master Guhan, Can you let me hold the Shenyuan sword in my hand and take a closer look? Although he knew that this request was a little too much, Grandmaster Tianri could not help but ask. There was no other way. No one in the world could resist the temptation of an empress sword. Get out of my way. Not only did Guhan not agree to Grandmaster Tianri's request, he even pushed the defenseless Grandmaster Tianri tens of meters away. If you don't agree, then don't agree. If you don't want to, then don't. Why are you being so rough? Don't you know the traditional Chinese virtue of respecting the old and loving the young? Grandmaster Tianri grumbled unhappily as he stood up from the ground. Just as he was about to reprimand Ji Yuhan, he found that Ji Yuhan had already raised his Shenyuan sword high up in the air. Then, as if he had exhausted all his strength and energy, he slashed at the lid of the furnace of heaven and earth without any way out. This was Guhan's only option. Guhan could only pour all the sword essence in his body into the Shenyuan sword and use the sharpness of the Shenyuan sword to force a crack in the lid of the cauldron of heaven and earth. Whether it would succeed or not, Guhan did not even have 30% confidence. That was why he could only leave himself no way out and use all the sword essence in his body to fight for this one chance. Unfortunately, Guhan's gamble did not succeed. The sharpness of the Shenyuan sword was indeed indescribable. Even the lid of the cauldron of heaven and earth began to tremble under the attack of the Shenyuan sword, but in the end, it only trembled slightly. Although Guhan had poured all the sword essence in his body into it, it was only a little over 40,000 sword essence. For a sword that required hundreds of thousands of sword essence to perform a single move, 40,000 sword essence was undoubtedly a drop in the bucket. In addition, Guhan had not synchronized with the Shenyuan sword at all, so he could only borrow the sharpness of the Shenyuan sword itself. He could not even use 1% of the sword's power, so how could he possibly slash a crack in the lid of the cauldron of heaven and earth? I haven't failed yet. Even in this hopeless situation, Guhan still did not choose to give up. Because he had used up all the sword essence in his body, Guhan's body was terrifyingly weak. He could only rely on the Shenyuan sword to barely stand up. Although his attempt with the Shenyuan sword had failed, Guhan still had a trump card. However, the price of using this move was far too great. Guhan was not even sure if he would still be alive after using this move. But for the sake of the King of Yu, Guhan had no other choice. Just as Guhan was about to abandon everything and use this move, a clear, chirpy voice rang out next to Guhan's ear. Guhan, Ifei said she wants to eat. Qingpin suddenly said this at an extremely inappropriate time. If she wants to eat, then eat. Don't bother me with these kinds of questions, Guhan said to Qingpin in annoyance. Stupid Guhan, how dare you yell at Qingpin? Qingpin had a temper that would explode at the slightest provocation. After hearing the disdain in Guhan's tone, Qingpin immediately threw a tantrum. You stinking baddie. Qingpin will never tell you that Ifei said she wants to eat that lid. What? Guhan was stunned. What do you think Ifei wants to eat? Lid. What a fragrant and sweet lid. The person who answered Guhan was not Qingpin's lowly voice, but a voice that was even more childish than Qingpin's lowly voice. It was like a weak and shy baby's voice. Is this Ifei talking? Guhan was a little surprised. When did Ifei grow to the point where she could talk? Alright, that wasn't the point. The point was, what did Ifei say she wanted to eat? She wanted to eat a fragrant and sweet lid. Although he wasn't sure what Yiping was thinking, Ji Yuhan still quickly pulled Yiping out of his hair and placed him on the lid of the cauldron. In the battle with Brant just now, because Yi Piaro had devoured Brant's ultimate move, he felt like he had eaten too much. He was lying in Ji Yuhan's hair and couldn't even fly. Otherwise, Yi Piaro wouldn't have asked for his opinion and would have directly let Yi Piaro fly out to find food. When Ji Yuhan placed Yi Qiong on the stove lid, a miraculous thing happened. Yi Qiong, this little guy, bit on the stove lid, just like a fat cicada nibbling on a watermelon, biting a small hole on the stove lid, this big watermelon skin. This was something that even the Shenyuan sword was unable to shake, but under the teeth of the little guy, Yi Qiong, a hole was bitten open. This was truly a very valiant achievement. Next, Ifei went all out and quickly bit through the lid, leaving a hole the size of Ifei's body. The lid that had been suppressing the flames in the furnace of heaven and earth had a hole. The flames that had been suppressed for a long time naturally tried to rush out of the hole. Once these flames with a temperature of more than 1,000,000 degrees shot out of the lid like a high-pressure flamethrower, they would probably be able to burn everything around them to ashes. And a part of Guhan's body, which happened to be blocking the hole, would instantly be vaporized, leaving a big hole through his body. But in reality, when these flames touched the hole in the lid, they were happily sucked into Ifei's body. These flames seemed to have become Ifei's food. With the help of these flames, Ifei began to eat the lid more diligently and quickly. About 2 minutes later, Ifei actually managed to bite out a hole that was thicker than a thigh. Unfortunately, first paw seemed to have eaten to his limit. After weakly finishing the last mouthful of the lid, the bottle fell from the lid. Halfway through, it transformed into a scarlet gem, just like fourth paw from a month ago. Chapter 769. Before the apocalypse, what was the furthest a baseball pitcher could throw? According to human data, the furthest a baseball could throw was over 300 meters. Ji Han's current situation was similar to throwing a baseball. He needed to throw a bottle of soul solution through a hole that was about 1 decimeter in diameter to the center of the cauldron of heaven and earth. The distance was about 3 kilometers. Ji Han's goal was to break the record of the longest distance thrown by a human by 10 times. Raising the distance by 10 times was fine. With the physique of a famous swordswoman, it was not impossible to achieve such a result. However, this was not the crux of the problem. The crux of the problem was how to throw a small glass bottle onto a juicy sword that was not much bigger than the glass bottle from a distance of 3 kilometers. This was like shooting a basketball from 3 kilometers away. Even if the energy of 10 Jordans was added to an ordinary person's body, they would not be able to do it. However, Guhan had to do it. Guhan only had one chance. This was because there was only one bottle of soul solution left. If Guhan failed, he would lose the chance to save King Yu. Whoosh! Guhan took a deep breath and took out a metal item from his pocket. He wanted to test it out and see how accurate his aim was. When this metallic object drew a beautiful curve in the air and entered the furnace of heaven and earth, Ji Han immediately switched his perspective to Juzi's. Through the blurry light from the furnace of heaven and earth, Ji Han saw a burning curve land beside him after a dozen seconds. Then, it vanished into nothingness. After estimating the distance, he was about 30 meters away from the Juzi sword. A distance of 3 kilometers was only 30 meters away. Even if Huang Zhong had been reborn, he had nothing to say about this kind of accuracy. This was already an extremely good result. However, no matter how good this result was, it was useless. This was not a competition, it was saving a life. He also had to throw the soul solution accurately onto the Juzi sword. Even if he missed by 3 centimeters, it was meaningless. Let me try again. Guhan moved his sight away from Juzi's body. When he was about to throw a few more metal pieces to practice his aim, Juzi's hurried voice suddenly reached Guhan's ears. Master, Sister Yu Wang's soul is about to die. At this rate, in at most 20 seconds, Sister Yu Wang will completely disappear. Juzi's words had already forced Guhan to a dead end. It would take a glass bottle at least 10 seconds to cover a distance of 3 kilometers, just like the metal block from before. In other words, in the remaining 20 seconds, Guhan only had one more chance to throw. Guhan was completely forced to the edge of the cliff. Go! In such a critical moment, Guhan became even more rational. He didn't hesitate or think. He didn't even take a deep breath. He just quickly picked up the soul solution in his hand and threw it into the cauldron of heaven and earth according to his body's best instincts. Guhan couldn't interfere with the rest. The rest was up to fate. At this moment, Guhan suddenly became like a normal person. He didn't dare to look at Juzi again. He just stood there silently, waiting for Juzi to report the final result to him. Success. Master. Juzi's answer was very simple. The soul solution accurately fell onto the Juzi sword. This faint green solution slowly entered the Juzi sword and started to nourish Yu Wang's bean-sized soul. With the help of the soul solution, Yu Wang's soul stopped dissipating at the last moment. Then, it started to gradually condense and finally recovered to the point where she could barely maintain her body. Unfortunately, the soul solution nourished Yu Wang through the juicy sword. If Yu Wang's soul directly came into contact with the soul solution, then her soul would probably explode to its strongest state. Not bad. Ji Yu Han finally relaxed after hearing Juzi's good news. He muttered to himself. Although Yu Wang would not be able to reincarnate and become a sword maiden in the real world, at the very least, Yu Wang's soul was saved. But at least King Yu's soul was saved. King Yu still had a chance to wait for the next Zhongdian sword to appear. But this time, fleeting Rena's wedding dress has been made for me. Gu Han stared at the depths of the cauldron of heaven and earth. He could faintly see that the sword of destiny that was originally prepared for Yu Wang had now become fleeting Rena's body, and fleeting Rena had turned from Yuan Ku into a sword maiden. This was an unexpected ending. At this moment, Ji Yu Han could vaguely guess what was going on and the story behind the fleeting time family's strange actions, as well as fleeting Rena's resistance, conflict, pain, and a faint trace of hope. Fleeting Rena must be the daughter of fleeting Zheng and a certain Yuan Ku. This was not impossible. There had been 3 instances of this happening in history. 2 of them were female sword-bearers and male Yuan Ku, and the other was male sword-bearers and female Yuan Ku. They had miraculously given birth to children of their own. It was not easy to achieve this, and required very complicated conditions. First of all, Yuan Ku had to be a human, or at the very least, a Yuan Ku in human form. It was easy to understand this, as it was impossible for a human and a dog to have children. On the other hand, the human side had to be the sword-bearer. The reason was very simple. Because only the sword-bearer could touch the Yuan Shen's body. Only then could the genitals of both sides truly have sexual relations. Only the white turbid liquid that contained the sword element could allow the seeds of both sides to fuse and mate with each other to become real life. Secondly, the two had to have true feelings for each other, or else they would not be able to give birth to a new life. No one could explain why this was the case, but according to countless historical records, there were many Yuan Chen who had forcefully intercourse with female human sword-bearers after capturing them. But without exception, these female sword-bearers never gave birth to new lives. As for the life that was born, humans did not kill these little lives as they did in most novels. Instead, they protected them and carefully observed their growth. As a result, humans discovered that the 3 lives that were born from humans and Yuan Ku did not combine the characteristics of both sides. Instead, they only showed the characteristics of one side. These 3 children were either humans or Yuan Ku through and through. There were no exceptions. It seemed that the humans were wrong. The children of humans and Yuan Ku did not simply retain the characteristics of one side. Instead, they were split into 2 parts and fused together. It was a combination of soul and body. If the children's bodies belonged to humans, then their souls might belong to Yuan Ku. Just like fleeting time Rena, her body belonged to Yuan Ku, but her soul belonged to a human. This was why when her body was completely destroyed by the furnace of heaven and earth, the elemental whirlpool would appear and absorb her body. However, her soul would be left behind, hiding within the furnace. When the time came, she would take away the sword of destiny that had originally belonged to King Yu. This was definitely a scheme planned by the fleeting family. No one knew where they had learned of Guhan's true plan. They knew that Guhan wanted to reactivate the furnace of heaven and earth and help King Yu regain his body. As the number 1 family of the human race, there was no way that the fleeting family would allow a human and Yuan Ku to fuse together. If news of this were to spread, the fleeting family's reputation would be destroyed in an instant. As a result, the fleeting family only had 2 choices. They could either kill fleeting time Rena and pretend that she had never existed. They could also think of a way to change fleeting time Rena's body and let her become a real human. However, Guhan did not expect the fleeting family to be even more imaginative than Guhan. They actually wanted fleeting time Rena to skip being a human and become a sword mistress. When he thought about it carefully, this was a very good deal. Once fleeting time Rena became a sword mistress, not only would she gain eternal life, but the fleeting family would also have an undying fighting force. If he thought about it further, Fleeting Time Rena might just be a test subject for the Fleeting family. The purpose of the test was to find a way to turn a human into a sword mistress. This was because the method could not only be used on a mixed blood like Fleeting Time Rena, but it could also be used on a human. Once this experiment succeeded, the successors of the Liu Nian clan would be able to obtain eternal life through this method when they were about to die. Then, they would be suppressed in the Liu Nian clan forever, protecting the Liu Nian clan for generations to come. It was impossible for the Fleeting family not to see such a huge benefit. As a result, the Fleeting family began to make use of this plan. This was why Fleeting Wooden Fish had so generously given the sovereign blood to Guhan and secretly ordered Fleeting Time Rena to find an opportunity to take over the King of Yu's body. This would allow Guhan to become Fleeting Time Rena's disciple. Of course, there were still some loopholes that Guhan did not understand. For example, if the Fleeting family wanted to carry out this experiment, they could have done it themselves. With the Fleeting family's resources, obtaining the sovereign blood and the body of a sword mistress would be a simple matter. Why did they need to borrow Guhan's hands? The Fleeting family definitely did not want outsiders to know about such a secret and inhumane research. They should have done it themselves. Why did they need to borrow Guhan's hands? Could it be the Fleeting family's intention to kill Guhan had not disappeared? Chapter 770. Although Nai Yang could roughly guess the reason behind Fleeting Rena's actions, it was not of much help to the current situation. The opening of the Heaven and Earth furnace was destined to fail, although it was not a complete failure. The Fleeting family had obtained a complete victory, and Song Hammer had managed to save his cloud-cast iron. Guhan was the only one who had lost completely. Forget it. Don't think that I'll give up just like that. I'll definitely find a second chance. Guhan touched his suitcase. There was still 7,000 cubic centimeters of sovereign blood in it. This was what Guhan needed to activate the Heaven and Earth furnace for the second time. As long as the suitcase remained, there was still hope for the King of Yu to be reborn. Although Guhan still had hope in his heart, it was only for the future. Guhan no longer had any hope for the present. He could only hope that the flames of the Heaven and Earth furnace would be extinguished as soon as possible so that he could leave this place. Guhan let out a long sigh. He suddenly realized that Zhao Hao was slowly moving towards him. "Stop!" Guhan yelled. "You can't get close to this place." Guhan was right. Zhao Hao could not get close to this place, as he was extremely close to the opening in the lid. Large amounts of hot air were spewing out from the opening. Guhan's body had been strengthened by the famed sword mistress, which was why he was able to stand so close to this place. If Zhao Hao, who was only an ordinary person, tried to get close to this place, he would probably suffer from a severe heat stroke within a few steps. If he was not careful, he might even die. This was why Guhan had to stop Zhao Hao. I know. Zhao Hao smiled sheepishly. He was still a dozen or so meters away from Guhan, but the heat in the air was already too much for him to bear. What a pity. I'm clearly right next to the Heaven and Earth furnace, and the furnace has already been activated, but I can only stare at it. How great would it be if I could borrow the Heaven and Earth furnace to forge a sword? Zhao Hao sighed emotionally and gloomily said. For a mere sword-forging grandmaster, witnessing the working process of the worldly cauldron was indeed one of the greatest pursuits in life. If there was anything that could surpass this goal, it would be to forge his own man-made sword maiden. You want to use the furnace of Heaven and Earth to forge a sword maiden? Guhan's eyes lit up. He seemed to have thought of something. Yeah. Zhao Hao nodded weakly. It's a pity that you didn't tell me about the Heaven and Earth furnace when you came out. Otherwise, I would have risked my life to return to the lab and bring all my forging tools and materials here. Then, I would have personally used the Heaven and Earth furnace to forge a man-made sword maiden. An artificial sword maiden forged using the furnace of Heaven and Earth would definitely possess extraordinary energy. A 99% similarity would probably be the lowest. I might be able to forge an innate sword maiden. I will become the #1 grandmaster in the world since ancient times. Speaking up to this point, Zhao Hao couldn't help but feel somewhat proud. However, Zhao Hao was purely delusional. It was true that the furnace of heaven and earth could forge a top-notch man-made sword maiden, but it was impossible to forge an innate sword maiden. Although the furnace of heaven and earth had not been activated many times in history, it had indeed been activated before. During this period of time, there must have been sword-forging grandmasters or even martial grandmasters who wanted to use the furnace of heaven and earth to forge an innate sword maiden. However, history told Jiyu Han that in the past 1,000 years, there had never been a natural sword lady born in the hands of a human swordsmith. Even those grandmasters with terrifying swordsmithing abilities could only forge 99% artificial sword ladies at most. However, when he thought about it from another perspective, it did not seem impossible. What the predecessors could not do did not necessarily mean that the future generations could not do it. If Zhao Hao really succeeded, he might be able to surpass the martial grandmaster level. If that happened, the humans would have to think of a new title for Zhao Hao. A super grandmaster? Or a lightning grandmaster? Although Zhao Hao's words were like a joke in Guhan's mind, he had to admit that Zhao Hao had given Guhan a shocking inspiration. Although the furnace of heaven and earth did not have a body that could be used by Monarch Yu, did Guhan really have to find a ready-made body? Couldn't Guhan forge a temporary body for Monarch Yu? This was the furnace of heaven and earth. With the mystical power of the furnace of heaven and earth, it might really be able to forge a body that could be used by Monarch Yu. It had to be known that the reason why humans had never been able to forge an innate sword maiden was not because they did not have enough swordsmithing skills to forge a body like an innate sword maiden, but because humans could not forge an innate sword maiden's soul. Without a soul, an innate sword maiden could not become an innate sword maiden. Now that Jiyu Han had a sword-forging grandmaster by his side, as well as such a mystical heaven and earth furnace, it was not impossible for him to forge a perfect sword maiden's body. Sir Grandmaster Tianri, if I prepare enough materials for you, can you start forging an innate sword maiden now? Guhan Yuchi asked Zhao Hao excitedly. No problem. Zhao Hao knew that every sword wielder's dimensional pocket was filled with all sorts of strange items. It was not strange for Guhan's dimensional pocket to contain materials that could be used to forge an innate sword maiden. At this moment, Zhao Hao's mind was filled with the idea of using the furnace of heaven and earth to forge an innate sword maiden, realizing every swordsmithing master's ultimate dream. Even if Guhan offered to sell the materials to Zhao Hao for 10 times or even 100 times the price, Zhao Hao would agree without hesitation. Even if he had to give up all his wealth, he would get the chance to use the furnace of heaven and earth. All right. If I want to forge an innate sword maiden, what materials do I need? Guhan quickly asked Zhao Hao. According to Guhan's experience, the furnace of heaven and earth was about to reach its highest temperature. This also meant that the best time to forge an innate sword maiden was about to arrive. Guhan could not delay for even a second. Of course, I need metal first. Zhao Hao also quickly replied. What kind of metal do you need? Will normal metal do? Guhan immediately took out a huge pile of metal items from his dimensional pocket. Some of them will do, but some won't. Zhao Hao answered decisively after a quick glance at the metal items that Guhan had taken out. Ordinary metals could not be used to forge an innate sword maiden. Zhao Hao first kicked out the normal metals from the pile that Guhan had taken out, leaving only a small amount of rare alloy metals. Only these metals will do. Zhao Hao looked at the remaining alloy metals with a picky expression. However, these metals are still not good enough. It will be difficult to forge an innate sword maiden with them, and they have not been purified. If I purify them, not only will it waste time, but the metal that I purify might not even be enough to forge a dagger. Rare metals. Jiyu Han's head spun furiously, and with a slap, he took out a large pile of metal powder from his dimensional pocket. The pile was as high as a person's waist. Will these alloys do? Guhan asked as he pointed at the pile of gold alloys. Oh my god. Where did you get these Emperor alloys? Don't tell me you went to the core room of Yuzhang City's super-dimensional wall protection system. Zhao Hao was very knowledgeable as he recognized that the metal powder that Guhan had taken out was Emperor alloys. In the entire Yuzhang City, Only the core room of the super-dimensional wall protection system had Emperor alloys. This was the alloy powder that Misaka Mikoto had dug out from the Emperor alloy used to protect the Emperor Zergs during Jiyu Han's battle in the super-dimensional coin core room. These extremely valuable metal powders were all kept by Guhan into his dimensional pocket. He did not expect that they would shine in this place. It's useful. Of course it's useful. It couldn't be any more useful. Zhao Hao's face was filled with happiness. I can't believe that I can use Emperor alloys to forge an innate sword maiden. I might be able to forge a spiritual sword maiden. The limit of a man-made innate sword maiden was the spiritual sword maiden. Zhao Hao had reached that limit the moment he opened his mouth. What should I do now? Guhan asked. Go in. Throw all the Emperor alloy powder in and smelt it into molten iron to forge an innate sword maiden model. As soon as Zhao Hao finished speaking, he froze. It was as if he had recalled something very important. Did you forget to think about how to forge an innate sword maiden model with these iron powders? Guhan stared into Zhao Hao's eyes as he asked. No. How could I? All right. I admit that I missed this part. Under Guhan's intense gaze, Zhao Hao had no choice but to admit it. The Heaven and Earth furnace could automatically melt the Emperor alloy powder into molten iron. However, there was no way to forge the molten iron into the shape of a sword. This was a job that had to be done by humans. In the forging room, Zhao Hao could use the tools that were placed in the electric furnace to forge the molten iron into the shape of a sword. However, this was obviously not practical in the Heaven and Earth furnace. No human could enter the Heaven and Earth furnace and forge the shape of a sword by hand. It was not easy to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but it seemed to be stuck here. This was no longer a problem that could be solved by humans. Since humans can't solve it, I can only borrow the power of the innate sword maiden. He touched his nose and asked Juzi, Juzi, you're Mo Di's sword, right? Yes. Master. Upon hearing Mo Di's name, Juzi's voice seemed to fluctuate a little. Then, do you have the ability to forge like Mo Di? Guhan asked again. Master Mo Di's forte lies in the creation of mechanisms. He doesn't have a deep understanding of the art of forging. At most, he only knows how to forge swords. Juzi was a little dejected as she answered. That's enough. That's enough. Guhan nodded. Juzi, I'll hand over the appearance of the king of you to you. Chapter 771. To be honest, Juzi's sword did not have any talent for forging swords. At the very least, it could be said that it did not have any talent for shaping the shape of a sword maiden. It was not easy for Guhan to forge a sword maiden after melting the imperial alloy, and he could not bear to look at it. Was this really a sword? Why did Guhan feel that it was similar to a wooden stick? Furthermore, it looked as if it had been bitten by a dog. It was simply too horrible to look at. Juzi. Try forging another shape. Guhan said coldly. Juzi could only knock on the iron sword again. When the shape of the sword appeared again, it looked much better than the previous one. Unfortunately, it was still too horrible to look at. Guhan observed the situation of the furnace of Heaven and Earth, and found that the flames were burning more and more fiercely. It was gradually turning the entire furnace of Heaven and Earth white. This was not a good sign, because once the color of the furnace of Heaven and Earth turned white, it meant that the temperature of the entire furnace of Heaven and Earth had reached its peak. As the saying went, when things reached their peak, the temperature of the furnace of Heaven and Earth would start to drop. At that time, there would not be many opportunities for Guhan to forge a new body for the King of Heaven and Earth. Juzi, I see that your movements are very skilled, and your strength is very uniform. The lines that you have forged are also very good, but why can't you forge a decent sword? Seeing that Juzi had failed for the third time, Guhan could not help but ask. Master, actually, Juzi does not know what to forge. Juzi, who had been speaking in a calm tone, had a hint of grievance in her voice. This was a very rare thing. Master, our Mo family's forging is about having a card up your sleeve. Only when you have something in your heart can you have a shape in your hands. Juzi does not know what kind of sword maiden she should forge. Her thoughts are extremely chaotic, so she naturally cannot forge the shape that master want. That's simple. Guhan thought for a moment, then said to Juzi, how about this? Just imagine the appearance of a sword in your mind, a sword that you are most familiar with. Then, you can forge it according to this image. The one that I'm most familiar with. Juzi fell into deep thought. After a while, she nodded abruptly and started to reforge. Guhan soon realized that Juzi's forging this time was completely different from the previous 3 times. Although Juzi had been forging continuously for the first 3 times, he had been hammering here and there without any rhythm. It could be seen that Juzi was at a loss. But this time, it was completely different. Juzi's hammering was just right, and the sound of her hammering on the keyboard was sonorous and pleasing to the ear. There were at least 10 white dots of hammering sound every minute, and these hammering sounds were like a sonorous and powerful war song. In less than 10 minutes, Juzi's 4th forging was completed. Through the shared vision of Juzi, Guhan was surprised to see a wide and long golden sword appear in front of him. This sword did not have anything worth boasting about in terms of appearance, nor did it have any unique artistic design. It was just an ordinary sword. But the lines around this sword were just right. The whole body seemed to be cut out by the golden ratio. It seemed that every size was in line with the laws of heaven and earth, making people unable to pick out a single flaw. There was not even a trace of awkwardness, as if all swords in the world should look like this. Why do I have such a familiar feeling when I see this sword? Guhan muttered as he looked at the newly forged sword. Suddenly, a light flashed in his mind. Good heavens, isn't this newly forged sword exactly the same as the Juzi sword? Wasn't this another Juzi sword that was alive and well? Juzi, did you forge this sword according to your own appearance? Guhan immediately asked Juzi. Juzi simply nodded. Master asked me to forge it according to the most familiar appearance in my heart. The most familiar appearance in Juzi's heart is Juzi's appearance. If Master doesn't like Juzi's appearance, Juzi can start over again. Juzi looked particularly wronged when she said this. It seemed that what Guhan hated was not that this sword looked exactly like Juzi, but that he hated the appearance of the Juzi sword. No. Just like this. This appearance is very good, there's no need to change it anymore. Guhan said decisively. The reason why he said this was not because he liked the appearance of the Juzi sword, but because there was not much time left in the furnace of heaven and earth. The entire furnace of heaven and earth was about to turn into a vast expanse of white, and there was no time for Juzi to forge a 5th time. Moreover, this was just the appearance of a sword. As long as it had the appearance of a sword, it was fine. As for whether it clashed with other sword maidens, that was not something that Guhan cared about. Anyway, Guhan did not care about this. Lord Tianri, the body of the sword inside has been forged. Can I let King Yu's soul enter now? Although Guhan had a cold expression when he asked this question, Zhao Hao could hear the urgency in Guhan's words. No. It's not time yet, there's still a very crucial step missing. Zhao Hao shook his head and continued, a sword forged from a large amount of the same metal is just an ordinary sword. It cannot become a man-made sword maiden, because this sword lacks a heart. If a person doesn't have a heart, then they naturally can't live. If a sword maiden doesn't have a heart, then it's just an ordinary sword. Then how do we make this ordinary sword have a heart? Ji Yuhan followed up and asked. Naturally, you have to forge a heart for it. Zhao Hao stroked his beard, then you have to find a material that surpasses the sword's body and embed this material into the sword's body. This sword needs to have a heart. For example, if the sword's body is forged from iron, then it needs to be forged from silver and embed into the sword's body. If it's forged from silver, then it needs to be forged from gold and embed into the sword's body. For the sword's body of gold, it needs to be forged from diamonds, and so on and so forth. It's more or less like this. However, what I just said is only the simplest way to choose a heart. There are many sword maidens that are forged from composite alloy materials. For example, this sword is forged from a super alloy like imperial alloy. This way, it will be more troublesome to find a new material that surpasses the nature of the alloy to forge the sword maiden's heart. Every alloy needs to be tested in detail to determine the most suitable heart for that alloy. However, after over 900 years of painstaking research by our Swordsmiths Association, we finally made a detailed list of the materials that can be used to forge the heart of each alloy. These are all recorded on that list. Grandmaster Tienri, time is of the essence right now. I don't have the time to listen to your detailed explanation. Just tell me what material I should use to forge the heart of this sword. If not for Guhan's forceful interruption, Zhao Hao would probably have gone on for a few more hours. I don't know either. Zhao Hao spread his hands and said something that almost made Guhan vomit blood. Didn't you say you have a list? You can take out that list and check it. Guhan's expression grew colder as he spoke. Firstly, I didn't bring this list with me. You should know that you knocked me out in the laboratory and didn't even give me a word of warning. Us blacksmiths aren't like you swordsmen who can use dimensional pockets, so naturally I didn't have time to bring anything and left it in the laboratory. Zhao Hao continued to ramble on. Secondly, it's useless even if I brought that list. Imperial alloy is the strongest alloy in the world. It was synthesized by Gendi using a method that only Gendi can use. It's specially used to protect the core of the dimensional wall. No blacksmith has ever dared to use Imperial alloy to forge an artificial sword mistress for such a precious material. Naturally, the list wouldn't have any record of it. Thirdly, even if someone had the guts to use Imperial alloy to forge, I'm guessing they wouldn't have found anything. I've said that Emperor alloy is the strongest alloy in the world. Since it's the strongest, then it's impossible to find a metal that's stronger than it. Without a metal that's stronger than it, it's naturally impossible to forge the heart of this sword. Grandmaster Tienri spoke so much, but to put it bluntly, there was only one thing he meant. Imperial alloy is too strong. He simply can't find a material that can make the heart of this sword. When an ordinary person heard this news, they would definitely fall into a state of intense despair. Because this wasn't a problem that could be solved by luck or skill. It truly required a material that was stronger than Imperial alloy. This alloy that Gendi had researched was already the strongest alloy on Earth in theory. If Guhan had painstakingly researched for a few decades after becoming Gendi, he might have been able to develop an alloy that was even stronger than Imperial alloy. But now, he couldn't even think about it. It was Zhao Hao's fault for not finishing his words. From the start, he didn't even mention that the sword mistress needed a heart. Guhan originally had good intentions. In order to give King Yu the strongest body, he had chosen the strongest metal, Imperial alloy. But in the end, he had fallen into a trap of his own making and forced himself into a desperate situation. Now, unless a meteorite fell from the sky, and this meteorite happened to contain a metal that was stronger than Imperial alloy from the universe, there was only a sliver of a chance of success. Wait, a meteorite falling from the sky? Guhan suddenly thought of something. He took out a box from his dimensional pocket and placed it in front of Zhao Hao. He then opened the box, revealing a long white object. Grandmaster Tienri, do you think this white dwarf fragment can become King Yu's heart? Chapter 772. Zhao Hao had lived to the age of 60. He considered himself to be an experienced and knowledgeable person. However, Zhao Hao had never seen a white dwarf, something that only existed in the cold-blooded writings on astronomy. Therefore, when Guhan repeatedly told Zhao Hao that the long white object in the box was a white dwarf star fragment, even Zhao Hao was at a loss. He did not know if the compressed fragment of a dead star could become the heart of a sword mistress. A white dwarf star fragment is the product of a star being compressed to the extreme. The star itself is made up of various gases and some metallic elements. These gaseous and metallic elements are all compressed together by extreme pressure. It should be a substance made up of carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen is the most common gas in the air, oxygen, iron, and almost all the trace elements in the periodic table of elements. The later the periodic table of elements has a shorter lifespan. In the end, it will not be compressed and the last few elements are man-made. If you say it is a metal, it should not have the characteristics of a metal. If you say it is not a metal, it does contain various metallic elements. Zhao Hao scratched his scalp and pulled his beard. He pulled dozens of strands. This question almost made Zhao Hao's brain explode. However, after 5 minutes, Zhao Hao still did not give Gu Han a definite answer. At this time, the color of the furnace of heaven and earth had turned completely white. Not long after, the furnace of heaven and earth would weaken and start the process of extinguishing. Whatever. I can't go wrong after trying. Gu Han touched the white dwarf star key. Gu Han knew that this white dwarf star key was extremely rare. It was originally a container to store precious sage seeds. Although the sage seeds inside had been used to repair Yuan-Tu Avicii, this white dwarf star key still had its own ability as a key. It was the only tool to open the warm home of Gu Han and Yi Qing. Once this key was integrated into Yu Wangxin's body, then Gu Han would not be able to open the home that Gu Han missed and could not forget in the near future. King Yu. Gu Han muttered to himself. Then, he threw the white dwarf key into the hole without hesitation. The white dwarf key was extremely heavy. Gu Han had to squeeze out every ounce of strength in his body to throw the white dwarf key beside Yu Wangxin, who was being forged inside the furnace. At the same time, Gu Han immediately switched to Juzi's view and ordered Juzi to place the white dwarf key into Yu Wangxin's body. The moment the white dwarf key came into contact with the golden sword, it was as if the white dwarf key had fallen into a swamp. It silently entered the golden sword without any sound or light. However, Ji Yuhan could clearly feel that when the white dwarf key and the golden sword fused into one, the golden sword had instantly become different. There was suddenly an aura that seemed to be able to oppress the masses, telling everyone who saw her that she was the ruler of the world. Lord Gu Han, what's the situation inside? Did you succeed? Zhao Hao asked Gu Han nervously and curiously. If he succeeded, then he could solemnly add a line to the table that had been researched by predecessors for 900 years. He could tell everyone that Emperor alloy could be forged using white dwarfs. This was a huge discovery. It was enough for Zhao Hao to leave his name in the history of swordsmiths forever. In the future, all new swordsmiths would definitely remember that it was he, Zhao Hao, who made this shocking discovery when they studied the table. It should be a success. Gu Han replied with uncertainty. He then asked, can Yu Wangxin's soul enter now? Oh, there's another condition. Gu Han's guess was right. Zhao Hao still did not make things clear. Thus, Gu Han said coldly, what other conditions do you have? Tell me clearly at once. I don't want to ask any more. My mistake. My mistake. Zhao Hao stroked his beard symbolically. He did not have the slightest bit of sincerity to admit his mistake. There are still 2 steps left. One is to grind a dimensional crystal stone of Earl grade and above into powder and sprinkle it evenly on the sword. This way, the metal will be able to supply the sword essence to the sword maiden. The powder of the dimensional crystal stone will be like the sword maiden's blood. The factor that determines the grade of a man-made sword maiden is the dimensional crystal stone. If you want to make a spiritual sword-grade sword maiden, besides imitating the original forging material of the natural sword maiden, you will also need to sprinkle the dimensional crystal stone powder on the body of the artificial sword maiden. An artificial spiritual sword-grade sword maiden requires at least a king-grade dimensional crystal stone. So on and so forth, the immortal sword grade requires an emperor grade, and the emperor grade requires. Alright, I don't know what kind either. In addition, the forging materials of the immortal sword grade and the emperor grade contain some things that only exist in myths and legends. For example, the Xianming sword uses Zhuwu Xianming's pubic bone, the heavenly gathering cloud sword uses the cartilage of the Yamata no Orokai, and the Shenyuan sword is said to be forged using some post-celestial 5 elements treasure, as well as the black-yellow merit chi. These materials that have never been heard of, humans are simply unable to imitate them. That's why we swordsmiths can't imitate the man-made immortal sword-grade sword maiden and the man-made emperor-grade sword maiden. Otherwise, we humans would have many more powerful sword-bearers, and those pitiful spirit sword-bearers wouldn't have to be stuck at the spirit sword realm for their entire lives, unable to advance any further. Zhao Hao said with a sigh. Unfortunately, the latter half of his words were meaningless to Gu Han. Gu Han only needed to know that Yu Wangxin's body needed a high-quality dimensional crystal stone. That's easy. Gu Han took out the last Duke Seed dimensional crystal stone he had from his dimensional pocket. He was prepared to throw it into the heaven and earth furnace once again as the blood for Yu Wangxin's new body. According to Zhao Hao, this Duke Seed was a precious dimensional crystal stone that could be used to forge a spirit sword-grade sword maiden. Using it on Yu Wangxin's famed sword-grade body was simply using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Using a Duke Seed was enough. However, Guhan wasn't stingy at all. He had already thrown in such a precious white dwarf star key, so why would he care about a mere Duke Seed? However, before Guhan could throw out the Duke Seed, he was stopped by Zhao Hao. Lord Guhan, I haven't finished speaking. Why are you in such a hurry to waste the dimensional crystal stone? Emperor Alloy is originally a super metal forged by Jendi using all the magical metals in the world. He infused Jendi's power into it and mixed it with at least 10 Duke Seed dimensional crystal powder. Emperor Alloy already contains a large amount of dimensional crystal powder. You don't even need to send in any dimensional crystal stone. This step has already been completed. We can skip it. Guhan really wanted to beat this guy who only spoke halfway. He silently put the Duke Seed back into his dimensional pocket and waited for Zhao Hao to explain the last step. Actually, this last step is not essential. However, if we have the materials, we can give this man-made sword maiden an even more magical power. Zhao Hao paused for a moment. The Yuan Zhan, who are known as divine spirits, all have their own godhood within their bodies. Forcefully digging out the godhood within these Yuan Zhan's bodies and then fusing it into the artificial sword maiden's body will allow the sword maiden to possess an extremely mystical power. What power? Guhan was stunned for a moment and immediately asked. The power of a god. The power of faith. At this point, Zhao Hao's eyes revealed an intoxicated light. Godhood is the symbol of a god's power. It is a tool to absorb the faith of humans. Every godhood corresponds to a godhood. The god of death's godhood corresponds to death. The god of wisdom's godhood corresponds to wisdom. Some powerful main gods' godhoods can correspond to multiple godhoods at the same time. For example, Athena's godhood corresponds to the 5 godhoods of wisdom, war, power, beauty, and virginity. If such a godhood is fused into the man-made sword maiden's body, the sword maiden will also inherit the godhood contained in the godhood and have the power to control this godhood. Almost all Yuan Ku gods value their godhood very much. They would rather die than let their godhood be controlled by others. In human history, there was only one coincidental experience that allowed humans to obtain such a godhood and create such a man-made sword maiden at the same time. She absorbed the godhood of Uther, the goddess of love and fertility in the Egyptian pantheon. Thus, she obtained the godhood of love and fertility at the same time. One was the ability to make 2 people who did not love each other fall in love quickly. The other was the ability to speed up the growth of crops. These 2 abilities sound very powerful and are very helpful for the survival of humans. However, they are useless in battle. What's more unfortunate is that this godhood of love caused a lot of chaos. At one time, the entire city's upper echelons were about to fight each other because of the green hat on their heads. In the end, the sword-bearer was imprisoned forever, and the man-made sword maiden was sealed forever. This was a story that Guhan had never heard of before. It was also a story that was not recorded in any history books. Therefore, Guhan knew nothing about the fact that a godhood could be fused into a man-made sword maiden. However, when he thought about it carefully, it seemed that more than 400 years ago, Berlin Base City had an incredible harvest for 20 consecutive years. Every year, the grain output was more than 10 times that of the previous year. What was the legend of a dynasty producing 10,000 jin of grain per mu before the Great Destruction? Berlin Base City had truly achieved an achievement of 100,000 jin of grain per mu. This was an achievement that no one could imagine. However, after 20 years, this legend never appeared again. Berlin Base City's grain output returned to the average level. By the way, at that time, there was also a minor love scandal in Berlin Base City. A female sword-bearer at the famed sword tier actually managed to charm 2 male and a female immortal sword tier sword-bearers in Berlin Base City. It was said that the 3 sword-bearers had a face-to-face negotiation and requested to use a duel to decide who the only lover of the female sword-bearer would be. Then, there was no more. This was just a love scandal that was not paid much attention to. Today, after 400 years, there were only a few words left. Nothing more had been passed down. Speaking of godhood, I have one here. As he spoke, Guhan took out a transparent object from his hand. If the dead Loki could see this scene, he would definitely scream the name of this godhood. Creation godhood. Chapter 773. Without any hesitation, Guhan threw the creation godhood into the furnace of heaven and earth. Juzi caught the creation godhood. Just like the white dwarf key, it quickly fused into Yu Wangjiangxin's body. Is a man-made sword lady done just like that? Guhan turned to Zhao Hao and asked. Oh, it's done. Zhao Hao answered absent-mindedly. He kept thinking about the creation godhood that Guhan had thrown into the furnace of heaven and earth. He, who was a little careless, now realized that something was wrong. Guhan did not seem to be the original wielder of the Final Destination sword. This was because Guhan's attention was not on the Final Destination sword, but on the man-made sword lady that had been reforged. Emperor alloy. White dwarf star fragment. An unknown divinity. Any one of these three items would be a treasure that would shock the entire human world. But Guhan had thrown them all in without holding back, just to forge a man-made sword lady. This was something that Zhao Hao was unable to understand. A man-made sword maiden would only be a spiritual sword tier at best, and any of the three items would be more useful than a spiritual sword maiden. For Gu Han to use these treasures in such a manner, it was not enough to describe his behavior. Who is this Guhan? What is his identity? Will I be involved in something terrible? When Zhao Hao thought of this, he felt a faint desire to retreat. He wanted to stay far away from Guhan. But on second thought, Zhao Hao gave up on this idea. This was not the safe Yuzhang city, but the dangerous wilderness. God knew how many Yuan Ku were hiding around here. Although he was a master swordsmith who was equivalent to an immortal sword wielder, when facing a Yuan Ku, he was not even as useful as an ancient sword wielder. If he left hastily, who knew which Yuan Ku would swallow his bones? Besides, as a swordsmith, Zhao Hao was also very curious. He really wanted to know how powerful the artificial sword lady would be if so many rare treasures were used to forge an artificial sword lady. Would it give birth to the world's first immortal sword maiden? At the thought of this, Zhao Hao completely gave up on the idea of escaping. Even if Guhan were to kill him in the next second, he still wanted to witness the birth of this man-made sword maiden with his own eyes. While Zhao Hao was daydreaming at the side, Guhan was staring at the furnace of heaven and earth with lifeless eyes. The reason why his eyes were lifeless was because Guhan's vision was not in his eyes, but in Juzi's eyes. Although countless precious treasures were thrown into King Yu's new body, Guhan helplessly discovered that King Yu's soul was still unable to enter this new body. During the experiment in the instance dungeon, Yi Qing had clearly told Guhan that King Yu's soul had to wait until the sword maiden's body was completely refined into a milky white color before it could enter. Just like the milky white flames around Guhan that were already extremely hot. This was because only after the sword maiden's body was refined into a milky white color would it mean that the entire sword maiden was in a completely open state. Only in this state could King Yu's soul completely control every corner of the new body. Otherwise, King Yu would become a cripple. He would either be deaf, or have his limbs broken. Either way, this was not what King Yu and Guhan wanted to see. Around the orange, in the middle of the fire, the cloud-cast iron and Zhongjian sword had already turned milky white, just like the solidified milk on the ground. This meant that their bodies were completely open, and their souls could completely fuse with their bodies. Only King Yu's new body was still golden, and showed no signs of turning milky white. I understand. Guhan bit his lips. Imperial alloy, white dwarf star fragment, and creation divinity. With these three unparalleled materials combined, the material of this sword has probably reached the level of an immortal sword or even an emperor sword. The furnace of heaven and earth's temperature might be able to melt a famed sword maiden, but it can't turn this sword into a milky white color. We need to raise the temperature of the furnace of heaven and earth. Guhan looked at the flames of the furnace of heaven and earth, and discovered that the milky white flames had once again turned faint red. This was a sign that the furnace of heaven and earth was starting to weaken. Guhan had to think of a way to raise the temperature of the furnace of heaven and earth again, and gather more fire power to turn this sword made of all sorts of top-notch materials into a milky white color. Phew! Guhan's vision returned to his body, and he quickly took out the leather case that contained the sovereign blood from his dimensional pocket. Guhan had previously used a total of 4,000 cubic centimeters of sovereign blood to activate the furnace of heaven and earth. This was more than enough to refine an ancient sword maiden. According to Yi Qing, 4,000 cubic centimeters was enough even for a spirit sword maiden. In other words, when Yi Qing repaired the Emperor sword in the Instance dungeon, he used 6,000 cubic centimeters of sovereign blood. At this moment, there was exactly 6,000 cubic centimeters of sovereign blood left in the leather case. If Yu Wangxin's body was the body of an Emperor sword, then he would need to put another 2,000 cubic centimeters of sovereign blood into the furnace of heaven and earth. Guhan did not even blink as he took out the 2,000 cubic centimeters of sovereign blood from the leather case, and then smashed them into the center of the furnace of heaven and earth. The test tubes that contained the golden blood exploded on the walls of the furnace, and the golden blood quickly seeped into the walls of the furnace. The milky white flames in the furnace of heaven and earth, which had already weakened a little, instantly turned crimson red. What's going on? Why did it go from milky white to crimson red? Could it be that the sovereign blood had a positive effect, and it caused the temperature of the furnace of heaven and earth to drop? Guhan thought to himself nervously. In the method that Yi Qing had told Guhan to use the furnace of heaven and earth, the sovereign blood could only be used before the furnace of heaven and earth was activated. She had never told Guhan what would happen if he used the sovereign blood again when the furnace of heaven and earth was activated. Perhaps it really would have a negative effect. A trace of worry flashed in Guhan's eyes, but soon, Juzi reported to Guhan that the temperature of the furnace of heaven and earth did not drop. Instead, it started to rise, and it was heading towards 10 million degrees Celsius. Guhan let out a sigh of relief. It seemed like the sovereign blood did not have a negative effect. The flames in the furnace of heaven and earth had turned from milky white to crimson red because its temperature had increased. Only when the temperature reached the upper limit would the flames become milky white again. Time passed. After approximately 20 minutes, the flames in the cauldron of heaven and earth turned milky white once again. According to Juzi's report, the flames in the cauldron of heaven and earth should be around 13 million degrees Celsius. The color of the new sword lady's body finally started to change. The golden color gradually faded, and milky white spots started to form on the sword's body. However, when the flames in the furnace of heaven and earth turned completely milky white again, these spots were just spots. The new sword mistress body was still mostly yellow. Could this sword's body have already surpassed the Emperor sword's body? Guhan thought in disbelief. Could there be a sword mistress that surpassed the Emperor sword's body in this world? No. This should be the effect of the creation godhead. Because the creation godhead is an existence that surpasses the Emperor swords, if I want the creation godhead to merge with the body, I have to use a temperature that surpasses the Emperor sword. Guhan gritted his teeth and took out 2,000 cubic centimeters of sovereign blood from his suitcase. He threw all of it into the furnace of heaven and earth. Just like that, Guhan had thrown 8,000 cubic centimeters of sovereign blood into the furnace of heaven and earth. This had already created a record. It was the highest single use of sovereign blood in the furnace of heaven and earth in the past 1,000 years. Because the Emperor sword mistress only needed 6,000 cubic centimeters, it was meaningless to throw 8,000 cubic centimeters into it. The furnace of heaven and earth once again changed. The milky white became crimson red, and the temperature continued to rise. In the end, when it became milky white again, the temperature in the furnace of heaven and earth exceeded 40 million degrees and reached a terrifying 43 million degrees. Only a sword mistress like Juzi could stay in there. If Guhan's body went in less than 0.0001 second, Guhan would be vaporized. At the same time, Juzi also sent good news. The golden sword was no longer golden. Instead, it had become a faint white that was similar to brownish white. Although it was still a distance away from Milky White, it seemed that King Yu's soul could go in. Now, King Yu's control over his body could reach above 95%. There shouldn't be any obvious disability. It was just like a patient with a weak body. His body would have some symptoms like a fever or a cold from time to time, but this was already within the range of Ji Yuhan's tolerance. But could he really let King Yu in like that? Could it be that he didn't have any more sovereign blood? Guhan once again opened his suitcase and unhesitatingly grabbed 20 test tubes and threw them in. Just like that, Guhan had thrown more than 10,000 cubic centimeters into the furnace of heaven and earth. This was a number that could cause a qualitative change. The furnace of heaven and earth's flames instantly started to spin. Through the transparent lid, one could see that the flames seemed to have formed a massive tornado that rampaged through the entire furnace of heaven and earth. At the center of the tornado was where Juzi was. That place was extremely peaceful, and compared to the raging fire tornado, that place was like a peaceful heaven. "Master, this is bad, Master," Juzi suddenly reported to Guhan. "The temperature at the center of the tornado has instantly disappeared. The temperature around me has dropped to 0 degrees. Big Sister King Yu's body is quickly turning golden." Guhan did not say anything and directly shared Juzi's vision. It was just as Juzi had reported. At the center of the tornado, there was a space that was less than 10 square meters. The temperature of the tornado itself was over 80 million degrees Celsius, but the temperature at the center of the tornado was exactly 0 degrees Celsius. The two completely different temperatures coexisted in harmony here. If it wasn't for the fact that this concerned King Yu's rebirth, Guhan would have praised this as the most miraculous scene in the world. "Master, what should we do now? Do you want me to take this sword to the flaming tornado?" Juzi suggested. This was a good idea. Since it was 0 degrees Celsius, they could put the sword somewhere that was not 0 degrees Celsius. "No. Let's wait a bit longer. I have a feeling that only here can King Yu be reborn." Facing this terrible situation, Guhan suddenly said calmly, "You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.